Hey guys, Tarke here, and today we are joined very kindly by both Jonathan and Neon, aka Mark II, Raiz, and Octavian. Since we've had this question a lot, just to get straight into it, do you guys mind introducing yourselves to anyone who doesn't quite know who you are and like what it is you do at GGG?
Yeah, so basically I'm Jonathan. I'm the tech director at GGG, so that basically means being in charge of the tech team, but I also do a lot of the sort of high level like design kinds of things, and like just working with a lot of different departments to sort of work out what sort of stuff needs to happen in order to move things forward. And yeah, that's kind of thing.
I am Mark II, also known as GGG Neon, or Neon Spider. This is a tricky one because I still don't know what my title is, but ultimately, I try and just make everything right. Production, design, balance, anything. Just trying to make sure all the pieces fit together and move, and everything gets developed. And coordinating with Jonathan and Chris a lot.
I would definitely say he's one of the most important people at GGG in terms of like, making sure everything happens, because like he's a powerhouse of a producer, I would say, and also very good at doing that kind of design, especially boss design. I would say is your speciality is boss design, as a designer, but definitely just like getting stuff done as a producer. So yeah, probably one of the best hires we ever had, honestly. And it's kind of funny actually, because like when we first went to hire you, I was kind of not so sure about it, because like because we saw it and
straightforward about it.
Like we were like, oh, this guy's just like he's just like playing PoE all the time. He's like not actually like a good at working. He's just like some just gamer who's like playing way too much PoE. So yeah, we weren't. I wasn't like 100%, but Chris was like, nah. He's like, he's gonna be awesome. So
is this the first time Mark's heard this bit of the story?
I'm sure it's not.
I left the office. It was a very interesting experience, but showed up. Interview was just standing in the middle of the office, real informal. Everyone could hear. I was like, this is weird. I don't know what's going on here. We effectively just had some bants, and then I left, and I was like, I don't really know what just happened. It was interesting, but I got the impression that Jonathan wasn't.
I don't know. It's just like it's interesting because I have since learned to value just like game playing experience a little more, because I kind of had the impression of like, yeah, this guy's just like, he's just playing games all day. He doesn't actually work, but obviously definitely not the case. Mark II's like the hardest worker at our company. So, he put all of the like grinding that you were doing previously and like Ashron's Call and stuff like that into like making PoE. So
I think at the time I was playing, I was raiding in Rift.
That's
and
right.
then
Rift.
Diablo 3 was coming out. Yeah, it was Rift and Diablo 3.
Yeah, I do remember actually you being a big Rift person.
I was a Rifter.
I've never played that game. So yeah, I don't know.
I played it for a bit. I really liked it, but I couldn't get my friends to stop playing WoW, so I stopped playing it to go back to WoW, and I was very upset. Yeah. But Rift was cool.
Right. Full circle.
How did you?
To be honest, just real quick, like to give even more credit to Neon, because I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with him from ETUP stream. It was very cool, I would say, for the community to just have somebody from GGG that was kind of like always there, and that connection was there. It was very cool.
Right. Very good.
I was gonna ask, how did you get that first interview?
We were desperately wanting QA at the time. Like we were super like, because do you remember what year it was?
End of 2012.
Really?
Wait, when did we release?
Well, so we started we started selling supporter packs in April 2012.
Oh, when did we release? Act 3X.
Act 3X. 13 probably.
Yeah, I think it was early 13 we did that, and I started just before that, so like December 2012.
Wow, okay. So we didn't even have you for like supporter pack release, like that sort of stuff. Wow, okay. Yeah, I don't know what the hell we were doing back then.
From my perspective, there's a bit of a chain here. I knew someone named Alex, and I knew Alex, well, I don't know if anyone remembers Duolc, DUOLC. He was the Soul Taker supporter.
Right.
And I knew him through my brother, and that guy worked for GGG for 2 weeks, I believe it was, covering Rory when Rory took a couple weeks off as QA. I might have this wrong, but I think it was something like this.
Right.
And he contacted. He was the one who went to the office and had a piece of paper with a sign on the door that said like beta keys,
right.
please.
That was the guy. I had no idea.
So he just happened to live kind of in proximity to the office. So he told Chris, "You just have to hire this guy. Just do it." And then I got a call from Chris. So technically, it's through my brother, I guess, at the start of that link. So thanks to my brother.
Yeah, very good.
Cool.
Well, now that we know who everyone is and everything, just to get straight into the Blight thing, could you guys give the Blight sales pitch, in your guys' opinion? Like, why should people be excited to play Blight League?
So the basic idea obviously is tower defense. That's like the sort of the core thing a lot of people will get. But I think the most important thing for us was to kind of distill that sort of like tower defense feel. I really need to get rid of that bird. To distill the tower defense feel like into a format which is like super fun to play over a really short period of time. Like so I mean, like obviously, like some of our best leagues have been things like Legion and stuff like that, where there's kind of this thing like this like really fun, intense event that occurs like in the level. So we really wanted to make sure we're doing that kind of thing. And so we want to just get this sort of like this like micro tower defense feel, and it actually ends up being quite cool feeling. Like we kind of have to get the sort of tension with the tower defense gameplay to sort of make sure that like. If you like, it's definitely impossible if you don't use towers, but if you do use towers, it still takes a lot of effort to actually be successful in terms of like your actual character. So that's kind of like the like the tension that we sort of have to sort of create this league. And when you get that tension right, it's actually quite fun. And it's actually it's sort of almost in a way similar to Abyss as well. It sort of has a similar feel. It's kind of almost like reverse Abyss. In a way, like the thing ripples out and the monsters come to you rather than you running down it. But yeah, like it ends up kind of having a similar sort of feel to it a little bit. But obviously there's like more lanes, so it's a bit different. That's kind of a bit of a rambly thing. I kind of didn't really distill that down. It's like a really small package for you, but that's just kind of the top of my head feels. I don't know if you've got any different ideas about it.
Just keeping it short. I'd say medium to high intensity, fun micro tower defense encounters.
It's like the short but sweet, explanation, I guess.
You said you were interested in like distilling down tower defense, making it more of a micro thing, I think is what you called it, that could fit in a Path of Exile. What aspects of tower defense were you like really hoping to be able to grab and pull into Path of Exile? Like what was it about tower defense that attracted you guys to this as a mechanic? Like, yes, this is the thing we want to do as our next league.
So for me, I used to play quite a lot of like Warcraft 3 custom maps, like custom tower defense maps. That's kind of where I got my tower defense fix from originally. And there was like a huge variety of that type of gameplay. So I mean, it was kind of like a whole bunch of that kind of stuff. We actually wanted to do tower defense a few times in the past. Like I think like it must have been mentioned like at least 3 or 4 times in the past when we were doing lead designs, but we just never came up with a way to sort of make it happen quite. And then I was playing so like most of the tower defenses that I played in those days were like the kind of mazing style where you like build towers and then the monsters have to like path around them. But that type of power defense was just never going to work in Path of Exile because like it's kind of like it sort of implicitly requires that you're playing like a longer form encounter, which wouldn't really work in the context of like the small encounters we're doing. So then I played a different one where it was like I think it was like Kingdom Rush or something on mobile a while back. And then is when I realized, like, okay, yeah, the thing with the lanes are fixed and the towers are placed in specific locations would work much better for this sort of format that we have here. And so, yeah, like I quite enjoyed like that game and a few other tower defense games like it. So that was kind of the thing where I was like, yeah, I think we can do something like this. But the focus really had to be on still making it feel like Path of Exile, like still feel like a good encounter that where the player is like super engaged. So we had to sort of make sure we're still getting that, as I've said a couple of times. But yeah, that's kind of like that. Those are the kinds of games. It's sort of hard to say like exactly what the name of the fun that is, if you know what I mean. Like it's kind of it's sort of hard to explain exactly, but I've got a lot of fun memories of tower defense from back in the days, and I just wanted to replicate that feeling, I guess that's where it comes.
It's hard, yeah, because it's been so many years. I think a lot of people are just not familiar with the tower defense genre
Right.
anymore.
Yeah, it was kind of weird, and
So-
like the Reddit comments were like, "Oh, it's like balloons," and I'm like, "Huh, that's like not even a reference point that I would have thought people would would grasp onto." You know what I mean?
I'll admit
Um,
that's where my mind went as well.
Right. Okay. Right.
I
Yeah, I know.
didn't grow up playing like Warcraft custom games and things like that. My experience
right.
with tower defense games are their modern modern successors.
Right. Yeah.
Did you at all maybe play the Van Helsing tower defense game that came out many years ago now?
I haven't actually.
Yeah.
I played Van Helsing a little bit, like the original one. I didn't even know they had a title. Have you played that?
Yeah,
No,
there was.
okay.
Oh, okay. Well, there used to be. Well, the Van Helsing game had a mini game, and they eventually turned it into an entire standalone game, and
Huh,
it's
okay.
quite fun. So
Right.
interesting
Alright.
to see.
I should probably have a look at it before we release Blight. Like, see if I did anything quickly to do something with. Yeah.
6 more days. Well, 5 now.
Yeah, that is true. You'd be surprised how how close to the line these things still, these things
Oh,
go up to, right?
trust me,
Yeah.
after that December thing you guys did, like I'm not surprised at all. When we were talking
Right.
about when the league was designed, and it was like, oh, December last year? No, a month ago. Yeah, I think
Right. Yeah.
you guys worked really
The
fast for sure.
the thing that we're still sort of trying to like work on right now is there's some terrain gen bugs where it doesn't like so the hard part is like making sure that the encounters will spawn correctly in the level. So there's quite a few cases right now, which is annoying, where like if the generator is failing to generate an encounter because like it can't quite fit it into the level. So we're kind of struggling a little bit with that right now to sort of get that done. And so I mean it's not exactly like a gameplay thing, but it is causing the gameplay to be worse, obviously, since it doesn't work sometimes.
It's definitely difficult with this in the fact that you have maps like Toxic Sewer, where, I mean, if you think about Toxic Sewer, so how can you fit a tower defense into that? And that answer is not trivially. So to try and make sure that the complex encounters with, lots of lanes and lots of forking and good tree pattern can occur in that kind of map is very difficult. But we kind of do need to accomplish it, at least to some extent. Otherwise, of course, we will have it that no one wants to run those maps, and we still want it to be that. I mean, it is okay. I mean, what we'd see is another Legion with Glacier going on again if we don't get that right. So
Yeah, so it is important.
Can
hopefully
I
we get that
ask
right.
why in Syndicate we had the special like fortification rooms, and then since then we haven't had that again? Because that seems like an easy fix in theory.
I mean, like, so it is, but the problem with that is that it means that you're losing some of the, part of the thing that we want to take advantage of with the terrain generator is to have it so that the terrain generation leads to interesting situations that would otherwise not occur. So I suppose it would be possible to use something like that for certain maps. Like maybe that's actually a reasonable idea that I hadn't considered until now. Like maybe we just like have a special toxic sewer room that we can spawn just for that, just for that mode.
Yeah, we have considered it, and it is currently still on the cards for if we can't get this generation right, then that's something we're going to fall back to and have a look at.
But I would definitely only want it to be used as a fallback. Like,
yes,
it's one of those things where you want to take advantage of the native terrain generation because it just feels more, like in tune with the level and so on. And we actually did have, because I mean, there was a period there where we went through this phase of like not really having the league mechanics in the level. And people actually started to tire about it quite a bit, like it was in there was like there was like incursion and like, so what were the ones around that time that were like synthesis of course, and like there was a few around that time. People started to be like, I want to see more stuff in the actual level, and so we kind of have been doing that. And the other thing as well, actually, is that because we're working on 400 so much, our terrain guys are like super busy with that. And so therefore it's kind of in our, like all the leagues we've been designing on purpose have been like, hey, we want to minimize the amount of like terrain work that goes on because the terrain guys are so focused on 400. So yeah, like that's also a consideration. And so we might have to think about that for 390 as well. There will be a bit of terrain stuff going on with 390, I guess. Yeah, now that I'm thinking about what exactly that is. So yeah, so I mean, obviously this is getting a bit into the future, but yeah, like the that is so that, yeah, I mean the team's like stretched a little bit thin due to that. So we have to be a little bit careful about what exactly, like which teams we're putting on what at the moment. Yeah,
So
is that important for players to be able to run every map? Because you guys are, what it seems like at least, to be big fans of meta shifts and people playing different builds and maybe doing different maps, and now we get a new atlas every time.
Right. So I mean, like, it's okay if like there are maps people prefer and maps people don't. But I think that if people are only playing exactly one map because that's the only map that matters, I think that's a problem. Like, it's fine, obviously, for the people like, here's the 10 maps that people care about this league. I wouldn't want it to be, it's just this one now because that's like technically the best, and there's a problem with that. And I think the Glacier thing was a little bit like that. I don't know if you agree, but
if we start a league and the immediate right answer is to just do the same as the last league, I consider that a little bit of a failure in that we should have promoted new options. We should have changed things up. It should be that there are some other options to explore, and maybe we fail at that, and maybe Glacier still ends up best answer. But
hopefully
not.
Do you know what? Like, I don't know. Do we know what have you changed about Glacier, if anything?
Well, one thing changed with Glacier is I know it had I can't remember the exact rate, but it was near to 100% chance to spawn that encounter outside in the big open area. It couldn't spawn a wide variety of the bonus content underground, and as such, you could very quickly get to a legion, very quickly complete it, and then recycle that loot. So now, at the very least, I know that the bonus content is capable of spawning anywhere in the map, not just restricted to that big outdoor area. I know that sounds like a negative for those people who are really loving Glacier, but
I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Honestly, like it's.
I mean, it's how pretty much every other map behaves.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
Armory still has the spawn towards the front, but I think that's been addressed to some degree as well going into this league. I don't know. There's little details, but it makes sense.
It's sort of amazing how like the tiniest things can change something. Like you wouldn't necessarily think that like some tiny detail of how a map was designed by a level designer would necessarily turn into this big thing about how all the players are now running this map as opposed to that one. But yet, like, it's just like every little detail along the chain ends up mattering for this kind of stuff. It's kind of
happened back in Dove League as well with Armory specifically. Like the Nico was incredibly likely to spawn in the first couple of rounds. And I remember way back in Bestiary League, Leyline would very consistently spawn a strongbox on the far end of the map on the left-hand or right-hand side, right by the entrance to the boss room. Like I only know this because in Bestiary League, Leyline would spawn a kind of monster that was worth a lot of money. So I would farm it there. And I noticed it after a large number of them ran. It got fixed a couple of leagues afterwards, which I know because Slippery Jim did a video testing it just to call me out.
I do
but
recall
it definitely was there in Bestiary.
I kind of vaguely recall there was a thing that Raiz fixed about like strongbox spawning at some point where they were like they were really consistent for a while, and then that got improved. But I didn't really know, like I wasn't aware of like a huge amount of detail about it. I just heard this was fixed at some point. So yeah, that's all I know about it.
To backtrack a little bit, since I think you alluded to it, where you didn't seem too keen on Blight having its own rooms, is the idea there that in the ideal world you'd have the environment where you would have the Blight plus the map boss plus other like organic monsters, so it's like extra intense. Is that kind of why?
Well, I don't think the map boss would usually be involved, but it's not so much the existing monsters. It's more just that the shape of the terrain like changes a lot about like where the towers can be spawned and like how it all just feels. So I think that in an ideal world we would be taking the most advantage of the terrain features in order to make the encounters feel quite different each time, and that's kind of what leads to like that's one of the axes of randomness that like leads to the feeling like there's a lot of variety. I mean, obviously there's other axes as well in terms of like the monsters that are spawning and the topology of the encounter type that we have in the back end and like other monsters and so on, and like tower positions and blah blah blah. But like that is one of the things, and that's like one of the things we try to think about and do when we're designing a league. That was kind of one of those things we started liking around Breach, because like Breach was quite affected by terrain. And so we quite liked that, and so it's kind of one of the things we tend to like to incorporate in some cases.
Touching on a small point you mentioned there with the variety of monsters, is it going to be, because from the description of the league it sounded like the Blight was mind controlling things, enslaving them and sending them at you, that's sort of the flavor of it. Is it going to be like Harbinger then, where it pulls from the mobs that are native to that tile set or just native to that map that you're in?
It is not, and the reason why is because in order to make it so that the tower stuff worked well, because like the towers are mostly, they're not mostly about damage. They're mostly about exploiting weaknesses in the monsters. And so if we had to make sure that the encounters had like monsters that you could recognize quickly as, oh, these are the fire monsters, I'm going to use the ice tower, that kind of stuff. We had to really make sure so that was super clear. So if we were just using monsters all through the game, I don't think we would have been able to establish those same like good sort of counterplay things, because it would have been much harder to identify like what monsters are good against what and that kind of thing. So that's kind of like the main reason why we wanted to make sure that they were designed. And there's like a sort of a bit going on with the like monster design in terms of like how the waves are spawned and like, you know, what monsters are selected and that kind of stuff. So this is another thing that Mark has also worked on quite a lot as well.
Yeah, we're not using the monsters in the areas, but I mean a very large range of what monsters can spawn in maps.
Right.
Can also spawn from Blight encounters. Right. And they've been custom modified in different ways and different mechanics. And some are fast, some are slow, some have things that speed up monsters and make them tanky, and some are again resistant to being slowed, can't be stunned, etc., and all that stuff, you know, compounds to make it that it was the better choice over using the monsters in the
right. So yeah, we just need that sort of control to make sure that the encounters feel good. So yeah.
Since you mentioned weaknesses, and earlier you said like it'd be really difficult without the towers, so to try and like give a base number for it, if you had like a fire monster which was weak to ice tower or whatever, how much more effective is an ice tower than a different tower, for example?
I wouldn't. I guess a bit of a correction. I wouldn't say so much as weaknesses as much as it is strengths.
Okay.
So the fire monsters are resistant to the fire towers.
Okay.
That's the way to look at it. So it could spawn, say, both fire and cold monsters in a single encounter, not from the same location, but it would mean that fire and ice towers are not something you want to necessarily build during that encounter. The main thing is just, you know, say there's a chilling tower, the cold monsters cannot be chilled. Fire towers will deal 99% near to zero damage against the fire monsters. And you will be able to see on the UI what type of monsters are coming, and as such build different towers.
So is there like icons in the portal icons at the bottom of the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
The UI will have a number of portals. It'll have them grayed out when they're not spawning, yellow when they're spawning, highlighted when they're spawning, and within the portal contains the type of monster that is coming. You won't have a full mix. There'll never be a scenario where there's 6 different types of monsters coming, and as such, you're just like, I don't know what towers to build. They always are paired or restricted to 1 or 2 types, or maybe up to 3 types.
Is there any crossover between that and player damage? Are those fire mobs more
No,
resistant to players?
the player damage is in no way hindered against them. I mean, aside from standard resistances, monster resistances, there's nothing specific there. There's no, you're playing a fireball character and so you just are incapable of doing the encounter. We don't want to do anything like that where you penalize certain builds.
That was a concern that we had early on about this, which is why the decision was made to, you know, split those a little bit more. But I mean, am I right in thinking though that the fire monsters are still like as resistant as a fire monster would be to players, but it's just that they're more resistant to fire towers than they are to fire players, while still being resistant, if you know what I mean.
Yes, as would if that same monster type was used in the game normally, they would have higher fire resistance than others, and as such. But it's just the normal standard monster resistances.
Another thing that we've like heard a lot of is so what's going to stop like a really juiced up tornado shot character just standing in the middle, or like a cyclone character just ignoring the towers completely, or will we have to be using the towers to realistically be?
You do not have to use the towers. We've tried to balance that right, but at the end of the day, we have to pick a point. If you are doing so much more damage than if you're doing an excessive amount of damage, you're probably capable of doing it. But this is where hopefully things like the terrain come into play. I mean, For the case of tornado shot characters, of course, you have things like line of sight coming in, and you've got lanes coming from left, coming from right. You might have ones that are a bit more difficult, things with proximity shield, there are mechanics to try and counteract bits and pieces. But yes, at the end of the day, if you're doing so much damage and have so much clear speed, you do not have to use the towers. There's nothing saying you must. It just will be, especially for average players, all the way through to above, or average characters through to above average characters, they will want to or may need to use towers. This also helps kind of bring up weaker characters as well, I guess, in that they can focus more on their kind of tower gameplay and hopefully have a bit more succession instead of maybe feeling like they're just failing all the time. They can work on that and hopefully get better at that.
There's also things like so I mean, he hinted at it before, but if you've got so sometimes most of the time the encounters will be like in one direction, but sometimes you get them where they're going in complete opposite directions from the center thing. And if that's the case, like a thing you probably want to do is just like put all your towers on one side and then put all of your player killing on the other side to kind of like balance it out. So that's the kind of case where like it would be really difficult to do both sides at once just as a player. So yeah, that's an example of that, the kind of thing where you probably want to. But I mean, once again, if you're just so super powerful that you're doing so much damage. I mean, I'm actually interested to know, Mark, if you know off the top of your head, what kind of life multipliers compared to a regular map multiplier you say?
They're generally anywhere between. I mean, there's quite a wide range, but some things are extremely fast with 2.5 times or 3.5 times the life, up to 10, 11 times the life.
So they're tanky.
Damn.
Because of the fact that towers are there, right?
Yeah, for frame of reference, do you happen to know roughly what the numbers on, like, I don't know, an Incursion monster might be or a Legion monster might be, just for comparison?
So
if you don't have it off the top of your head, that's fine. But
I can't remember exactly. I think Legion rares in, say, a T15 map are about 1/10 of the boss. And a regular rare, I think, is about 1/5 of that, even. I think it's like 5 or 6 times multiplier on your normal League content. And then this is obviously beyond that. Yeah, beyond that.
Damn.
But of course, the monsters aren't running at. I mean, in general,
they're slow, right?
The monsters, you do get to just wail on them. Some things make them quick. Sometimes a boss will spawn, or some mechanics like that make them faster. But it's not like you're getting 2 to 3 seconds to make a choice here. You do have not a long amount of time, but a reasonable amount of time to do some DPS to them.
How long would you say is the average encounter?
We're trying not to make them. Well, there are some anomalies, but we're going for like anywhere between 30 to 60 seconds. 30 is pretty short, though. I wouldn't even go that short. But maybe very, very early in the game. You could probably get up to 90 seconds, and then there are some extreme cases that are many, many minutes, but that's they're not common.
And just real quick, so we clarify, in terms of character power, what would you guys at this point consider to be like an average character?
When you say, so this is interesting because average could mean like different. I mean, okay.
Yeah. Like, I mean, for instance, do you think
like what content capable?
Good answer that is, because it's like, okay, so there's average where you're looking like of the people who are running T15 maps, and then there's average of an actual average, which is just so crappy that we probably wouldn't even consider it.
Ignoring it when it's like the majority of players don't get past Act 1. Like for people playing maps, like clearing content sort of thing.
Even if you looked at the people who even got to maps, the average is low, right? Like,
yes.
The average
much lower than you would expect. I can tell you that.
So yeah, like when we're talking about averages, I suspect the time we're probably thinking more like 80th percentile or something like that. You know what I mean?
I mean, if I had to give some numbers, just let's say level 90 characters in towards the end of maps. You know, we're expecting 6 anywhere. Well, I mean, we understand they go lower, but 6 to 6.5k life ish. But we also understand, of course, it goes down to 5. Well, obviously, it can go down to about 3 or lower. But generally, like for example, if we're doing a boss pitched at that territory, we have to understand that if we want it to be a little bit harder, we do 6.5k life or so. I mean, that's very hard to give a single average there, but and the average, I would say, shifts, like tier 1 maps are probably intentionally a little bit lower than which they're a little bit tilted on the easy side, whereas by T16s, T15s, they're on more the harder side.
So you wouldn't think that that's somebody who's like, for instance, killing guardians, right? That just has kind of a random character. He runs into a guardian, ends up killing it.
I mean, I would say your average player is not killing guardians,
Okay.
especially when. But your average T16er probably is capable of doing so. And but then there's of course a huge difference between a 2 to 10 second kill and the several minutes that some players take.
Right.
Some people fight the Minotaur and have to do several loops around his room, kiting him, and others stand there and right click and win. It's very difficult. It's one of the hardest things to balance around at all is the fact that you have someone at that tier doing 10 to 20k DPS and another player doing 20 30 million DPS. Maybe not that extreme, but let's say 6 million, 10 million, anything. The difference in those values is so substantial that it is. And again, on the life axis, you have 3k life characters because they didn't know or weren't informed that they're meant to invest a certain amount of life, or they've just gone full glass cannon. And then on the other spectrum, you've got 30k ES mana guardians, etc. And it's like, how do you one of those characters is just going to be immortal or close to immortal, and one of those characters is just going to explode, and it's not trivial. It's not trivial to pick where to balance around.
I suppose the interesting question from my perspective is, like, a lot of people might hear that and be like, why don't you? And so then the question becomes like, well, why don't we do that? And I guess, like, in some sense, we kind of do like to, like to make it so that there's a large amount of power. Like, it feel powerful if you can compare yourself to the guy doing, like, who's got like 10 times less life and 1,000 times less damage. Like, it's just we kind of feel like that is an important element of the game. So yeah, like, it's a tough challenge to put yourself in for. But then on the other hand, like, I think it is a big part of what makes you really feel like you gain mastery over time, right? So and I think that's important.
With that in mind, how is the difficulty working in Blight? Since, as far as I'm aware, the enemies kind of ignore you unless you're directly blocking their path, and they just kind of go for the bulb or the middle piece. So if the enemies aren't directly attacking you, how do you make it feel challenging, so to speak?
That was actually very difficult. And I suspect, in the end of the day, I don't suspect, it is actually less dangerous to play this league than to play prior ones to some degrees. But there are bosses, there are monsters that attack you, there are mods on monsters that will put you at risk,
So there are things that break the rules. Like, it's not entirely like, there are definitely monsters that can attack.
We do also create scenarios. Of course, it is, as pointed out, they have a lot of life, and you do get into situations where you've 2 lanes coming in. It's like, oh, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And often the right answer is to put yourself in harm's way, stand there and take a little bit of damage, or try and get them to. I mean, you can start a step around them, you can kind of orbit around them and kind of hold their aggro while they try and hit you, to try and slow them down.
It was definitely a design goal to make it so that if you're a normal player, then having to, like, taking damage is a thing you should expect to have to do in order to, like, stop yourself from losing. So, like, it is, you definitely have to play that card of, like, using your life as a way to stop the enemies. So yeah, that's basically the concept there.
Since we're a little bit into the nitty gritty of how the mechanic I'm curious if there's some specific exception for things that might break the rules of the system, like knockback or something along the lines of Frostwall. Does it
Frostwall
function
actually was
different?
Frostwall was an interesting one. We had to work out what we were going to do. So there was a brief period there where we were like, okay, so we're going to make it so the Frostwall is a thing that can take damage, and then things can attack it, and we're going to make it, and we're going to do all these changes. And then we kind of realized that, like, unfortunately, down that path was too much crap we'd have to deal with. So in the end, there was actually a really simple thing, which is kind of a cop out, and I don't love. But we were basically just said Frostwalls die just like very quickly when they're on top of blight paths. So like when they're there, they last like some, I don't know how. Like it might be like half a second or no, it might even be less. I'm not sure. There's some amount of time.
It's like 80% less.
80% less. There's something like that, which where they don't last very long while they're on top of the blight thing. It feels like a cop out answer because like the true correct thing would have been like they have life and they get attacked, and thus it kind of all should work into the system. But we just didn't quite feel like we could quite get that done in time because there are too many other exploit cases with that that could come up in other gameplay, which we were concerned about. And so then we were when we started thinking about that, we're like, let's just do the cop out answer. Are there any other things that are exceptions?
Knockback was mentioned. So I mean, there are, for example, the physical monsters are immune to stun and knockback. So if you were relying on those mechanics to win every single time, then it means that any time a physical wave is generated, you're going to lose or at least have a more difficult time.
Right. But the other ones it does work on.
Oh it does work in a lot of cases. It would just mean that relying entirely on that single mechanic and maybe sacrificing, well, wouldn't necessarily have to do that, but sacrificing DPS in order to do that wouldn't be a catch-all solution.
Right. I mean, we do try to avoid like kind of bullshit things, if you know what I mean, where it's like doesn't feel like this shouldn't work. Like if something feels like it should work, it probably should work. But yeah, unfortunately, Frostwall was one where we just couldn't easily come up with a good example. But yeah, the knockback thing I think is a pivotal solution where just some monsters are immune, so therefore you can't like use this as your catch-all. Like I'm going to be able to win every encounter with this kind of thing. Yeah.
Would it be safe to say this is a league similar to Legion where players are feeling pressured in terms of time management more so than like direct threat to their character?
It's probably fair to say that to a degree. It's less time pressure. You definitely don't feel as much pressure when you 15 seconds was just a very short amount of time, especially for Legion, that is, when you've got a couple of seconds, that is identifying at least what's going on if you wanted to. Identifying if there's a boss, trying to look for the warhordes, picking, if you couldn't kill everything, then picking Maraketh over the other one, etc. Whatever was the highest value. There's at least a little bit of time there at the start of that 15 seconds as well to kind of just be like, all right, here's what I'm doing.
And then that was part of the challenge with that as well. It was intentional there where it was like, we want player like, because I mean, okay, ultimately you could, like, given that it's relatively easy to break any particular monster out, we wanted the monster selection to be an element there, which is why we're kind of very keen to have that. Whereas in this league, it's like that isn't so much of an element, so like we're okay with backing off a little bit from the ultra time pressure. Like there was a period there where, like, for example, like something that came out really early on in testing was like, okay, I feel like there were a lot of people complaining, like, I feel like I don't have time to build any towers, and so a lot of people were just not building them, like even when they had resources to do so, because they weren't feeling like I had a gap to kind of do it in. And so we just sort of pulled it back to like the shortest gap possible where people feel like, oh yeah, I can like build. I get a little moment of time where I think, oh, I should build a tower now. And then you do that without actually making it so you're waiting or like worrying about it. So that's kind of what we're trying to, where we're trying to shoot for. Like there's just enough time to feel like I can build towers. Well, while still also having cases where it's like, oh shit, I totally did forget about this. And like, I'm not going to build. You see that sometimes as well. But a lot of the time you're like, just at the point where you think I haven't built a tower for a while is right around the point where you should be doing it. We're doing that job right anyway.
Again, there's no 100% catch-all solution here. One player will think there's too much time. Another player will think there's still not enough time. Right. It entirely depends. So, we do believe we've picked the best answer there. Right. But no, I'd say it's less. Just simple answer. It's less stressful from a time perspective than Legion.
It does seem inherently more suited to that because the monsters are coming to you rather than you having to rush and find them around corners or, behind a doorway or something that you didn't anticipate having to go and check. you don't feel like you're being screwed out of something by the layout, or at least it
Right.
seems like that from the video footage.
Right. The other thing to actually, just one question: have we yet implemented a thing where once all the monsters are dead, the next wave comes in? Because if we haven't, we probably need to implement that.
I cannot remember. I think no, we did. We did.
Because we've got a general system for that we
yes.
made Delve, right?
Yes.
So yeah, after Delve, I think we made sure.
The moment that one wave finishes spawning or is dealt with, the next one comes. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So preemptive strike on that.
They are continuous. It's not like clear everything and then just find yourself waiting 5 seconds for something to happen.
Yeah.
That's not possible.
Right.
One thing that I was really curious about, and this was a big thing when people first found out it was the Tower Defense League, what made you make the decision where you're not like preemptively setting up towers, meanwhile you're like running around to set up the towers as you're being swarmed, sort of thing?
There is a little bit of time. Like it's not a lot. Like where you get a chance to preemptively do it. That's like Like how long is that? Like
I think it's currently 20 seconds, but once you've used up your starting cost, it starts the encounter immediately.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I mean, we have a problem right now, of course, which is if you didn't want to build any towers and you just wanted it to start instantly, then you do find yourself waiting.
We probably need a button for that.
Yes, that is something we have to solve this week.
Right. And then the other question, I guess, I'm surprised nobody's really asked us what the interface is like on console.
I had a meme waiting for it. I was gonna
We were
bring out
going
the
to.
controller and be like, but how will this
So the
function?
answer to that basically, so you press start and then the screen kind of grays out and it highlights all the places you can build towers, and then you can use the left stick to move between the spots, and then like it's like one tap to build the tower you want. So yeah, like it's relatively fast. It's not going to be as fast as it is on PC, where you can just kind of click it. Also, like you kind of like, because it's modal, right? You have to enter the tower building mode as opposed to not tower building mode. But on the other hand, because you've got a controller and you don't have to click in places, you can just kind of flick over to the place you want to do it and do it. So that is how it works. But that's like a bit of a challenge. But I mean, it's kind of like it is always tough coming up with good user interfaces for this kind of stuff on console. Just not having a pointing devices makes it trickier. But I think we're gonna do it. I was actually saying to Mark, like, I wonder if we could get away with slowing the game down when you have that open. But I'm not 100% sure we could. It might be a thing we could maybe only do like in multiplayer or something like that. Not 100% sure about. We've never done anything like that before, so I'm not like sure that we would actually want to try it.
I'm actually curious as to how the mechanic does work in multiplayer. Is the map owner the one who's allowed to build towers and make those decisions, or is anyone in the party capable of it?
Anyone can. There is a single resource pool, of course. If Jonathan builds a tower and it's my map, it still takes from the pool. It is whoever builds the tower, it is considered their tower, and when you upgrade a tower, it becomes your tower, and that's for the purpose of like ring enchants and anything that would modify the tower. And then so shared pool, but anyone can build them.
I remember when we talked about this, I was a little bit skeptical. I was like, "Is there?" Yeah, I was like, "Sounds like a." I mean, I'm happy to go with that idea, but like, I was a little bit like, maybe we should just make them. But I mean, like, I think at the time when we were like, you were pretty convinced that allowing anyone is fine.
I don't know. I mean, one of them is more friendly for multiplayer. Someone can go left, someone can go right, and they don't have to wait for the other person. And maybe that's too advantageous for multiplayer. It's really hard to say.
That was my next follow-up question. Like, if you allow that level of building freedom, particularly and potentially in more open maps where maybe the encounters are more difficult because you have more things coming at you, I don't know. Do you think that maybe it's less of a problem later when players get to the point where they're powerful enough to be ignoring the towers a bit more, but like maybe early on that's another advantage heaped on top of party advantages? Is that potentially an issue with the league?
Oh, potentially, yes. It's true that
Sorry, I left the question too open.
It's true the situation we're in right now is possibly not the best solution. We might want to make it map owner only, and that's just a discussion we're going to need to have.
We haven't put it on alpha.
No.
So that's that's exactly the kind of question that alpha is good for, right? Because like the problem with multiplayer testing in the office is like, it's harder to sort of test that way when you've got, certain people have to be available at the same time, blah blah blah. And so yeah, I suspect. Do you know when we're going in alpha with Blight?
As soon as possible.
As soon as possible, right? So it's probably as soon as we get all. I'll tell you when it probably will happen. It'll probably happen as soon as we get all the generation issues we're currently fighting sorted, and then it will go on alpha, and then it'll be all that play. Yeah.
Can I
although
just...
we have to be.
Sorry, can I just say that on that note, there's been a few leagues now where it's been really painful playing in groups, and while it might be too powerful, I think if you are ever going to have a league which is good for groups, this makes the most sense, because you can actually make interesting strategies.
Well, especially in the blighted maps where you've got like an actual long, big tower defending section. I think that would be quite fun with a lot of players. Though I haven't actually tried that myself yet. But yeah.
We as long as we don't cross the line where multiplayer is the only way to succeed,
right?
Or multiplayer is the only way to reliably succeed. As long as we don't cross that line, and individual and solo gameplay is still completely viable, then either direction we go here is probably fine. A situation that could occur is that we don't have party members capable of building them, and then that goes live, and then it is a or to alpha, and it is a very, very popular request that party members can build them, and that's just a decision we need to make.
Right.
And
it is currently the case on our testing servers that they can all do it, though, right?
Yes, currently anyone can build them. Yes.
Since you mentioned the endgame blighted maps, so you're saying they're going to be like, obviously there'll be extremes, like 30 to 90 seconds for a normal map. How long will a blighted map encounter last for typically?
Minutes. That's vague.
At least 2 of them.
Plural.
Yes. 2 to 60 minutes. No. It's more like 2 to. I wouldn't even say 2. More like 4 minutes. Let's say 3 to 4. Look, they have varying numbers of lanes boards and boards them more time, so it's not like I
think there still is a little bit of that sorted out as well. Like
yes,
at the moment, but I mean, the intention I can say is certainly to that. It's like it feels like a kind of one of those big sort of like multi-round, like longer term. Like you should basically you really should be able to take advantage of all the top level tower abilities. I don't know if we've talked have we even talked like publicly about like how that works, like with the upgrade?
No, not really.
So basically, at the top of each tower upgrade. Yeah, I guess this maybe isn't even clear in any of the putting materials we've done.
But
at
the
the top
say
of each
quickly, though, just to interrupt you, I didn't know this was a system until my friend Grimro went through your trailer frame by frame, and from that you could tell. And that was the only way that we knew there were tiers. So sorry, go on.
Right. So yeah, anyway, so there's a thing where basically you upgrade 3 times. It is 3, right?
Build, upgrade.
Build, upgrade. So there's 3 tiers of like normal things, and then after that there is a fork where you get to pick between one of 2 tower types that change how the tower works quite substantially. So the a lot of the interest in sort of late game stuff comes from like the combinations you get between the different like all those different permutation types. So the base tower types, there's like 5,
right? Flame tower, fireball tower, chilling tower, stunning tower. I don't know the exact name. It's effectively
probably not decided.
Seismic trap. The sending out pulses that will stun enemies.
The ground shaking one.
There is a
mini one,
minion which will summon minions to distract the enemies, and
there's the buff
shocking tower, and then a buffing tower which will
6?
Yes,
yeah,
6 towers.
Right,
yep.
6,
and the buffing tower will buff any towers and radius of it in various ways.
But all of those have 2 terminal like different upgrades from each other that can change it. And sometimes like there are cases of that where it's like you upgrade and like the amount of damage it's doing goes down, but it like does something else. So like I don't know what a good example of that is.
I mean, flame tower, fireball tower can upgrade into flamethrower tower, which is just a lot more DPS, a lot less range, and it has more coverage than the fireball tower. But again, the range goes down.
Whereas the other side is
the meteor one, right?
Meteor tower,
is just a single target, a high range, small area of effect, just super nuke.
But also it's got low speed, right?
Yeah,
So
it casts
faster
less,
monsters. So
yes.
faster monsters are
So it's like the
so it's
glove
good against fast monsters.
That'll obliterate like bosses with
Right.
high HP that are a bit slower.
Right.
But then Chilling Tower, which is effectively just Ice Siphon Trap, just creates beams to a number of enemies, applying chill to them, damaging them. The chill increases in magnitude as you upgrade it. The number of targets increases and the range increases, etc., as you upgrade it. And then one of the final forks is, say, Freezing Tower, which fires again less frequently, but fires a single, very powerful, piercing projectile. And so there's interesting things there where if the tower is positioned in such a way it can fire
Along the
directly
lane.
up a lane, it's obviously far more effective. But it's doing less consistent. It's probably overall doing, depending on the scenario, doing really less slowing and less hitting less targets, but in the right conditions isn't. And again, you can get buffing towers, which now make it fire more projectiles and cover more ground.
So you want the buffing tower. If you've got like a several towers that are close together, then buffing towers are a really good option. But otherwise, like, you obviously have to be a certain number around it, become worth it, and that kind of thing. So, I mean, basically, like, I suppose we didn't really talk in the marketing materials too much about the tactical nature of like actually taking advantage of how the lanes are set up and how like the actual situation, and that's kind of where the variety comes from, and like actually doing that well in the league. So yeah.
A lot of players will probably fall into a pattern of doing what they are comfortable with. They have a, it's just let's say build lightning towers, unless there's lightning monsters, in which case build an alternative. And they might repeat that, and of course build a buffing tower if it's in proximity, and build some other CC tower perhaps, and that's just what they go with. But,
I mean, and you can certainly do that if your build is
yes,
very good, right?
Yes.
So then it's less important the setting up of the towers. But then on the other hand, if it's merely average, then you get like the tower placement and decisions there are more important. Yeah.
You can definitely take more advantage of the layouts, the random terrain generation, the lanes, the proximity of towers to another, the position of towers relative to the lanes, to the monsters, and what's coming from the lanes, of course. Definitely the bosses or boss waves will have some impact on that.
That is, you've mentioned it a few times now, that you can shred bosses and there's certain things you can do to prevent or to deal with bosses. Does that mean that bosses in this league are going to be similar to Legion League, where they can show up in just the middle of an event, like a general showing up in a Legion or a Breach Lord showing up in a Breach?
Kind of. They're more like, once you get a certain number of waves into a given, a boss can or will spawn. You can get multiple at a time. You can get maybe just one.
But I also think as well that like that there's also the concept of a boss wave isn't necessarily that there's like one big named monster necessarily. Like I think boss waves can also just be kind of like just a really big.
We've got a boss per type, if you want to say. So there's fire monsters with all kinds of things that can spawn, and then there's fire bosses or unique monsters. They all have an additional mechanical gimmick. Giving an example, there is bone rowers that can spawn, and the final wave they will revive 2 times additional before dying for real. And what this means is you can't just kill them super close to the point that you're defending, because you without risking losing, of course. So in the case where you see, okay, there's bone rowers coming from this, I need to make sure that when that wave spawns, I'm killing them far enough away from the point you're protecting. Otherwise, you run the risk of them reviving, and that's one example. So that's not so much a boss doing that. That's just a mechanic on the wave and on the monsters themselves.
Right. Because we've seen in the trailer, for instance, that there were flying monsters. Is that?
So I mean, like, does that actually
That's been very
Right.
from a technical standpoint, to implement flying monsters hasn't been trivial. But we do have monsters that are considered flying. Yes.
So I believe the rule, and I don't know if this has changed, but when we originally The thinking was that they were going to be flying from the perspective of the towers, but the player would still be able to attack them even with like ground, like we weren't going to prevent like ground slam from hitting them because like that would just be super annoying. So yeah, basically, so like I think that certain towers won't target them if they're flying. So you have to care about that. But is that still how it works?
That is currently still how it works.
Right.
We've had a bit of one because yes, as pointed out, when something is considered flying in Path of Exile right now, I mean, they can't be hit Spark, for example.
Right.
We obviously can't do that. We can't have it that Sparker is incapable of playing this league. So there's this whole concept of technically flying and things that are technically on the ground, and we've had a little bit of conflict with that. At the very least, flying monsters won't be blocked by other monsters. They'll be able to fly over them. So if you've got like a bunch of slow zombies that are in front, most monsters will kind of pile up behind them, whereas flying monsters will be able to fly over top of them. And yes, there are certain monsters, towers that are more effective at killing them or prioritize. So they one of the choices of the minion upgrading it spawns a bunch of monsters, like a lot more monsters that will have a larger range, and they'll go out and prioritize targeting flying units.
I think that we actually implemented flying a long time ago and then didn't really use it because I think we were even making it so like because there's the thing where a flying monster can actually fly over a cliff, like if in the like the base game, you want to call it that. Like that's the thing, but I think we don't even really use that because of the aforementioned issues with things that target the ground don't find monsters that are on the flying, like on the projectile hull, as we call it. So that was like a thing where we tended to not actually use that capability once we added it. So we kind of felt in this league like we'd actually finally be able to use it because it kind of has some interesting mechanics around tower defense. So plus it's just it's just one of those things, right? Like I mean, yeah, if anyone's played the whole like Warcraft 3 Warcraft 3 custom maps, it was just like, flying wave and coming at round 10 is like just absolutely like a thing that is like a classic element of those. So we kind of wanted to make sure we had something too.
One question I had, which it sort of makes a bit more sense now, but considering that we have maybe not weaknesses, but like some mobs are just like resistant or super resistant to certain towers, do you think that there's maybe a slight clash with the fact that you can have your rings geared to upgrade a specific tower, and you'll most likely want to are you seeing it where people are like going all in on Fireball Tower, or they kind of like they hedge their bets and they do like Fireball and Lightning or whatever?
Yeah, there is a clash.
You'll have to resolve that.
That is yes, it was. We knew it was going to happen. It was obviously going to.
I suspect the buff tower ones will be super valuable for that reason because they're
Yes.
very applicable to. They work against any weakness, but then on the other hand, they don't work if there's no place to put a buff tower in that particular layout. So there's a little bit of thinking there, right? Like we don't want to be completely devoid of that kind of stuff in our league. So
the problem would be more exaggerated the more impactful the rings. Are they extremely impactful? Like, do they shape?
They're not so critical that they're mandatory by any means. They're just a cool extra boost.
Right.
You can completely do everything without ever using them.
That was kind of my assumption of how they would function.
Yeah.
So you're never going to have a player who feels compelled to have like 20 different rings in his inventory to swap around.
I would hope not. I would hope not. Yeah.
No. I mean, if you want to do some crazy ring micromanaging, go for it. That's your choice. But is it necessary? No, of course not.
Okay. Out of interest, was it a case of you wanted both systems from the get-go, or you only had one and thought this needs more depth, so then you've now had the situation where there's the slight clash of design? Or
I think it more came from we wanted something else. Like with the oils system, when we add something like that, we just wanted to make sure there were enough syncs for them that we felt like there was a few more interesting things to do. You can also, I don't know if we talked about this, but we probably did, but you can use the oils on uniques that are unique to the league as well. So you can actually, if you're using those uniques, you can, and they are not in your amulet slots. So like normally you can only put these enchants on amulets, but in the case of those uniques, you can put them on the other slots that those go on. So that will let you get a few extra notables that way. So So,
Yep. So you can get five notables. So helmet, body, boots, gloves, amulet.
Would it be practical to actually wear all those armors, all the
Uh,
uniques at the same time? Then
I don't know if have we shown the helmet.
I don't know. Sorry, I'm
I
not
think we've
in
only seen the
schedule.
boots so far. You
Yeah,
can
only the
spoil the helmet. We won't mind.
I mean, I suspect that that's one of those things that they probably. So yeah.
Yeah, it'll be there soon.
Right.
And then you can get the tower modifiers on your rings.
Yeah.
Of course, they're additional. It's not not losing your implicit anymore, thankfully.
Yeah.
We'll move like off the Blight stuff and go into more like general 3.8 stuff. But while we're on the topic, individually, what parts of 3.8 have you guys worked the most on?
So I was heavily involved in the stuff, and there was also another feature that I was working on for quite a while that unfortunately didn't make it. So that's kind of a bit unusual. But yeah, so unfortunately, I spent a bunch of time working on something we ended up not shipping. But that's
and what
okay.
was it? Can you say?
Or... I don't. I shouldn't. I shouldn't. No, we shouldn't. Shouldn't talk about it.
It's okay.
I also, the funny thing is though, I don't know if 3.9.0 would also be a tactical time to do that either. Without actually saying what it is, I actually don't know that 3.0 would be
It's like you're spelling out the word walk next to a very excitable dog, so they don't they don't start jumping around in circles.
So yeah, we'll have to see about that one. But yes, that was a bit unfortunate. But whereas Mark worked on literally everything, so like
yeah, everything. No, I mean obviously there's some stuff I'm not, but a lot of it's not. If I don't know about it or I'm not working on, probably not gameplay content.
Right.
It's probably microtransactions, stuff like that. I actually have done a whole bunch of stuff on those this time as well.
Really?
Yeah. Well,
out of interest, by the way, what was that you work on microtransactions? That's unusual.
Well, we've a little bit. I don't know. We've been doing a bunch of work to make microtransactions capable of doing a bit more than just.
Oh yeah, you're talking about the AOG stuff.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
So, microtransaction attachments that can react to gameplay events or scenarios. So I don't want to give away examples because
you probably wait for. I mean, that's one of those things the community managers.
Okay, if I make up an example, you tell me if this is kind of the right idea. So, like, if I ignite a mob, my character like flashes.
That's the kind of thing we could do.
It's
although,
an option,
yes, it's an option we could do. That's the thing that could be implemented.
The main thing is we've been creating the base tech and utilizing it in a few cases for allowing all that to then happen. So, bit of a floodgate opening and. Will be able to do maybe
okay
otherwise yes, all just gameplay content. Thing I've had the least involvement in of the gameplay content is probably the recently like the balance and iteration of the assassin oriented skills.
The assassin was more Rory, right?
A bit of an unknown to me a little bit right now, as Rory's been handling the majority of. I will look at them and I will find out this week, of course, where they're at, and Alpha is obviously helping with all that, so it's kind of covered.
But you were definitely involved heavily in the Saboteur stuff, right?
Yes, I don't even know the names of the poison skills. We went through so many iterations. And
some terrible names. There were some such terrible names.
Can you give us the worst ones?
For a while. Well, I don't know, because the problem is I might say one that we're still using, and that's
no, that's good. That would be really funny. I'd appreciate that.
Cobra
Mamba Strike was just for some reason. Mamba Strike was just the worst prototype name.
Can't remember a lot of the others.
Yeah, but there were some shockers in there.
Yeah, they're a little bit comical, yes.
Yeah.
Why did you end up going with the name Blight? Was there, there's alternatives?
There was a few names we had. Like, what was
I got myself out of that, the naming process for that.
Because there was one that was real that we were ages. Scourge. We were gonna do Scourge for ages. And then there was that's right. There were all these names where like people like there was someone seriously suggesting like Mycology League or something. Seriously, like, there were like a bunch of people, and it's like you've got. And the thing is like there are people who suggest these names, and like I don't know, that even wasn't it. There was like another one like that where it was like it was like someone came up with it, and it was like exactly described scientifically what the league is, and I'm like, that's good and everything, but like nobody knows this word, so like it actually as a league name is just terrible. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Shit, I don't remember what that one was.
I just remember they started getting suggested, and I quickly removed myself from that situation. It was a too many cooks in the kitchen scenario,
right. and all the data files are coriander.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which was just someone picked around, like, because no one had the name at the start, and so someone was just like, the programmer who first worked on it was like, I have to call all these assets something, so they just called it Coriander League, and so that's what it is all called all throughout the data files for some reason. I have no idea what that's about.
We did do a mass rename, and
oh, okay, so that should be named to Bright now.
It consumed a weekend of.
Really? What are you bothering for? Just call it Coriander.
Someone needs to make a like. Someone needs to Photoshop a Path of Exile style logo saying Coriander League on it. I might see if I can get in touch with my graphics artist and have that for my channel.
Maybe the thinking was because like 5% of the population will hate it, or something. Maybe that was the theory behind Coriander. I don't know if that's it, but you know.
Before we get off Blight, one of the big concern we've seen in regards to like upgrading towers and stuff is having like all these extra UI elements on top of the gameplay.
Right. It's honestly not that bad. Like the areas are, yeah. I understand the concern, but I honestly am not concerned. At least not on.
We also went through a number of iterations where we had too few towers and too many. And the quantity of towers is something we were shifting up and down daily, and you might actually find that as such that the recording and a lot of the trailer stuff is incorrect tower counts. But I actually agree that when you look at the screen with all the towers and the UI on it, it feels like there's a whole lot going on. But and at least from my experience, and again from others' experience internally, and we'll get all this answer from Alpha as well, it isn't actually overwhelming when you're playing it. It just it doesn't seem like an actual woman gameplay. It's either that or the number of towers was misrepresented in the trailer. But yeah,
it's honestly it hasn't seemed, for some reason when you're playing it, it hasn't been. So, yeah.
You mentioned earlier that towers can upgrade. It sounded like, so there's build, there's upgrade, and then there's like the capstone upgrade. And you also said that events are, like 30 to 90 seconds. Do you expect people to regularly reach that level of upgrade on like 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 towers during the course of that time span? Because that does seem like a lot of menuing in that time.
I mean, yes, but
it's just one click.
Click.
Okay. So it's multiple to choose which one you build, and then after that you just hit an upgrade button when you have the resources.
Once you've built it, upgrading is just
one click. One click.
Before we continue, I'm just going to try swapping Discord server since we're having some lag, just to see if that fixes it. One sec. It's going to cut out for a bit. Okay, cool, we're back. Sorry, I just had to do that because we were having it where sometimes you were cutting out for a little bit, and whenever we have like any lag on Discord, people always say, "Oh, it's their microphone," but it's just a lag thing. So
right.
Should be better now.
Very good.
When it comes to anointments, we touched on it a tiny bit. Do you know how exactly it functions if, let's say, I had Golem's Blood on the tree and then I have Golem's Blood on the amulet? Does it like cancel each other out? Does it double? Like, what happens? And
so basically, you could, when you it actually, so the effect of it is the same as allocation, which means you can't have both it coming from your amulet and being allocated. Like, you don't get the effect of both. Basically, there is no reason to waste a point on a thing that is being allocated by your amulet. So and like there's a few other questions around that of like, okay, if I allocate one thing, can I use that as a point where I can allocate the other one across it and that kind of stuff? No, you can't. Like, it's effectively it is an allocated point that is not usable for the purpose of allocating from, is kind of the definition, if you know what I mean. And then also in case you're wondering, actually, have we even talked about the ones that aren't notables? I
Yeah,
think actually,
secret
that was
passives
revealed in a
you've
leak,
announced.
wasn't it? That was revealed in a leak, I think. Actually, there was like a leak where we had the extra passes with.
Well, yeah, there. Well, I guess there are extras. I don't know. If
But yeah,
people
so there
know,
are
but-
also extras, and those also those will show up on the passive tree somewhere. They're not connected to anything, but they just kind of have an existence on the tree. But they only show up once you get them. For the ones that aren't actually normally on the tree.
Yeah, you announced there'd be 13 secret, and then they've all been leaked on Reddit.
Yeah, that was really
how did
annoying.
those
Actually.
leaks happen out of interest?
Okay, so the way that happened, it was super annoying actually. So there was actually a thing we implemented like last league or something, it might have been the league before, where basically people who are banned on the website used to not be able to log in, but now they can log in, and so they can see information about like their account, but they can't post or do anything. And so that was implemented because for various reasons. And then we didn't think about alpha with regard to that, because on alpha is unlike the regular website, you can't see any of the pages unless you have an alpha login. And so what happened is that when we made that change, suddenly people who were banned on alpha from before were able to log in to that website and then thus see the passive tree on the website. And so what happened was there was a banned user who then just did that and just logged in and got the passive tree and then leaked it. So yeah, that was really annoying actually, because that's just an oversight on our part. Like now we're actually going to change it so that obviously we fix that bug, and then we're also probably going to make it so that there's more security on the patcher as well. So if you've got an old copy of alpha, even like currently if you've got an old copy of alpha, even if you're banned, you can just download you could data mine stuff from it. But we're going to change it so that and they might have even already done this, so that you have to log into alpha before it will let you patch the game client. So yeah, that's just like a little annoying thing there.
Out of interest, how many like alpha accounts are there out there?
There's not like a lot, but I mean, how many would you say active alpha users are there? There's not like, it might be like 20 or something like that. It's like a few, not that many.
Don't know how many people are banned. Yeah, I honestly can't remember.
I know we kind of want to like do
20.
Yeah, I know we want to do more, but the problem is it's like super hard to find people to trust to not leak stuff and do something. We really, so yeah.
I asked Bex and she said "fuck off." Like instantly fast. It's just like
those
no,
were
go
words,
away,
those exact
Tarke.
words.
Really?
Yeah, she was like fat.
Yeah, the problem is that
yeah.
the concern is if the community heard we were just like giving out alpha access, it would be like RIP Chris's inbox. So like I think that is a concern that also Chris has about that. So yeah, I mean it's honestly like not that exciting. Like because the league stuff only comes in like a week before usually, and then before that it's all kind of technical tests. Like we tend to put in just all of the stuff that like to make sure the game still kind of works and everything like that. So yeah, like the exciting balance stuff comes a bit later. And the other thing as well is like you have to be. Another thing that's annoying about alpha is like once someone's played the content on alpha, you kind of can't like you can rely on their feedback like that one time, but as soon as you make a change, you can't rely on anyone's feedback who played before the point you made the change, because there's a lot of things where like your perception of things is like highly affected by the first time you see it. And so like that's kind of an important element as well. So like almost the thing we probably should do is like have some kind of staged alpha thing where we like have like a day of feedback and then like have the next wave the next day. Like, and we do that. We should probably do that every time we do a league. But yeah, I don't know. Like it's kind of one of those things I'd love to do it, but it's just not currently the priority.
As a result of that, it does mean that the minimum standard of functional and everything of the league going on alpha needs to be relatively high,
right? Because otherwise you'll burn everyone's opinions before it's like really ready to test in a substantial way, and hence why there's things like, for example, like it's a great example, right? If we were to put it up right now, then what would happen is there'd be all these people complaining about how the layouts are often bad because generator problems we have, and then just if even fixing that wouldn't necessarily change a lot of those people's opinions, even when it is actually better, which is kind of an annoying thing. So yeah, we have to really make sure it's okay enough that people accept it before we put it up there.
Yep.
Okay. Just to backtrack a tiny bit to anointments. So out of all the secret ones, just what are your favorites since we've seen them all, just out of interest?
Right. Matt?
Oh geez. No, that's a cop out.
I love all my children equally.
Only mainly because it came up recently, but it was modifiers to energy shield, or actually, what was it? Mana modifiers to the spell damage from modifiers to. I can't exactly remember if it was.
I think it was like
50%
of energy shield applies to your spell damage or something.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's yeah. Sorry, and I got that confused with something else, which I also don't know if we've shown you. So
Well, all of the passives got leaked.
oh, that's
so,
true. The
yeah.
the Hierophant. Sorry, the last note of the Hierophant.
Whoa.
We had an
Wait, Hang on a
I
second.
haven't seen the
that might
leaks
have
at
not
all.
been in though in the leak.
Oh, well, there's some changes to the Hierophant. There's a thing on the Hierophant that had an interesting interaction with that energy shield or spell damage one that we had to solve, and so me picking favorites on there is a little bit difficult, but any that meant that we had some cool problem solving to try and do, I appreciate that.
Right.
And Neon banned for leaks, confirmed.
Anything you'd like to leak while you're here, Jonathan? Or
Not particularly.
okay. Okay then. So it's getting away from leaks, getting into more like the 3.8 generally stuff. So you said that you had a lot of hands in the Saboteur rework, which we've had quite a lot of conversations about our thoughts on the mind changes and
so
stuff.
there's been some criticism of the reservation thing with mines. That's been like a thing that's received some criticism of it. But I mean, I don't know what your discussion has been like.
Well,
in terms of, like, what
to be
you guys
honest, like we didn't really mind the reservation thing. The main thing that we were a bit iffy on was how. So I played a lot of mines before. It was like one of my favorite archetypes. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about the playstyle was because you always dropped them at your feet. It wasn't, you never cared about aiming. It was more just about how you positioned your character.
Right.
So then by making them throwable like traps, you've kind of removed all of that sort of thing.
The problem is there were just so few people who really wanted to engage with that. Like, it did feel clunky, and there really wasn't a huge amount we could solve with that while it was doing. It's kind of like, I mean, when we were actually coming to do it. So this was my suggestion actually originally. I was just kind of like, look, I just don't actually think we can make this a thing people will want to regularly play without making that change. And so then the question became, well, if they're being thrown like a trappers, what are we going to do to differentiate them from traps? And they actually do feel quite different now, especially because of the changes we've actually made even since the trailer, which is that you can now always detonate a mine at any time, including even if they're still in the air. There's no arming time, there's no nothing. It's just like you press D and that thing's exploding instantly. So that kind of has made them actually feel quite good and quite different than traps, I think. So yeah, like they feel pretty good now, but and certainly, and also you're still incentivized due to the nature of them, because of the way that they stack up in damage. You're still highly incentivized. Like, if you play them just like throw a mine and detonate it, like you're not gonna have the DPS. Like, you do need to throw several of them, so you kind of get that build up and explode thing more going on. So yeah, I think they feel pretty good now. Like, and that's been the thing that we've been doing.
So since they're detonatable at any point in their existence, that would then mean that you could sort of, like, in a very hacky way, simulate old mine playstyle by dropping a detonate mines totem, and then they detonate as soon as they exist, which is underneath your feet as you start throwing them.
I wonder if that would work. Does that work? I don't know. I haven't thought about that.
Just out of curiosity, because detonate mine totems, I've played a decent number of mines builds as well.
Right.
Detonate mine totems were a nice way of automating the process for a boss fight. But with what you've just said, it seems like that would work. Possible anymore.
I don't see why not. Why not?
But like their previous usage, where they were a nice way of relegating hitting the button to having a totem instead. Since you want to have multiple mines out and detonate them in sequence for extra benefits, basically that's just not something you want to do anymore. Yeah.
The thing though is that part of the thing that sucked about mine detonation before is just that, like, it felt laggy, it felt crappy. Like, there were so many problems with it, and like, since now those are kind of gone, it changes how they feel significantly. So
my general feeling on it is, like, I'm really okay with what I've seen of the skills that you guys have made, like the baked in mine skills and all that stuff, and I like this design as a concept, but I also really liked old mines, and I just wish I could have both. Like, I want new mines to be like called grenades or something, like Raiz.
There was a team member who kind of reacted a little bit like that as well when we were talking about that at a meeting.
Who was it, out of interest?
What was that?
Who was it, out of interest?
Oh, I don't really want to throw people under the
Okay,
bus because,
okay.
like, you know.
Well, he'd be my new best friend, so like I wouldn't be throwing
Right.
him under the
Okay.
bus.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's just funny because, like, the thing I remember thinking at the time was kind of like, it's funny how, like, it reminds me of that XKCD comic where it's like, no matter what you do, there's always someone who's got a use case that like is a bit different. So to me, it's sort of, it's like, as far as I was concerned, like, you know, it really seemed to me like, oh, I really hate the existing gameplay, but like, I'm not enjoying that. Like, I've never found a fun use of mines personally. But then it's funny how there's always someone out there who actually really enjoys that. So, you know, yeah, it was a surprise to me, but you know, there were actually people enjoying it.
Generally, no matter what we change, there will be a subset of people that aren't happy with the change.
But the thing with the mines, though, is that I seem to remember that the discussion we initially had when we were discussing doing mines at all, I think was kind of like the only reason people ever use mines, kind of like for cases where they're especially exploitative, because the downside of having to actually lay them at your feet was so extreme that people would only use them in those cases. And I think that's really how we were framing our thinking about it. So there certainly wasn't a like, oh, there's people out there who actually enjoy the feeling of like laying things at their feet, and that was not really in our mindset. I think at the time.
Looking at it, it's true that Glacial Cascade, KB, I guess Barrage, Arc,
Right.
didn't really see. I
Yeah,
mean,
like-
there are obviously some other cases. We didn't see a lot of use of mines outside of a small subset of skills for
Right.
such a
and,
long period.
and
of
none
time.
of those things there are like really mine-like, if you know what I mean, like in how and what the gameplay is like. It's more just like using mines because they happen to be an exploitative way to increase your damage. So that was kind of like the framing we had around what mines were like in PoE as far as what we're
It's
thinking.
definitely more. There are more options of skills where you would support or minify them now.
Right.
That is definitely the case.
Yeah.
Do you worry at all though that? So one of the things that I quite liked, because I play a lot of miners, a lot of trap characters, is as you say, there are certain skills which made sense with traps. They're like more Nova based, makes sense because you drop it at the enemy's feet, whereas mines would be more like projectile based. Whereas now both mines and traps want to use the same skills.
This is true. I would say that. I mean, obviously they're similar in terms of how you deploy them and the position of where they are when they go off. Yes, without question. That was probably one of the downsides, or one of the larger downsides of this whole change, is that we were creating a narrower gap between traps and mines. However, they are still both Saboteur, and we do think that they are different enough in terms of, obviously, you have the detonation mechanic, you have the chaining mechanic, you have the auras, you have the reservation, and how you build your character obviously changes different items. There are so many variables where they're different. But yes, that is something that came up numerous times, which was, you know, why are we just making these so similar to trap?
Right.
That we just have discussions about this, and we believe it's the right answer where we landed. Is it a shame we lost that existing playstyle for those people that liked it? Yeah, it's a shame. We just have to make those decisions from time to time, and it can be lossy. I even remember when we changed elemental hit from what it was to what it is now. There was some fight, and there was some on a much lower scale, of course, but even then some people were much happier with how it was before, which I didn't really understand, but it is what it is. And so yes, that's a much smaller subset of people, and yeah, mines had a bit more attachment. They were viable, and so yes, there's going to be more people that aren't for this change, but I do believe it's in a better place.
I think it's in a better place. Absolutely, it's much more fun.
Have you considered switching back to what mines kind of used to be in terms of targeting, where Bladeful would target on top of mobs or Firestorm would target on top of mobs without you having to stand on it? And if so, why?
I do believe their targeting has not changed in that regard. We've only just changed their deployment. I mean, you're throwing it to that location instead of at your feet. We haven't changed it. Are you asking why? Are you asking if we should change that?
No. I'm asking
So you're
if
saying,
in
like,
the past that's how it used to work. In the past, that's how Mind worked, where a lot of people were creating like Firestorm
so like
characters,
Playful, I
and that was
guess,
changed.
can target a thing far away, even if the mine goes off in a certain location, and that would still be the case now, I guess.
Yeah, there's. I think
change?
that's handled on a skill by skill basis, where we effectively have to tell that skill: do you target if you're a mine or trap, do you target your own location, or do you do some sort of target searching?
Did we change any of this at all?
I honestly don't know.
Right.
If we had, I don't even remember when. I don't know what we changed it for. Was it for everything? Wasn't I don't.
I can sort of understand why we
It
would
was too
want-
much damage.
Yeah,
yeah,
basically,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
'cause-
It's not
people were
understand
just
why
breaking
we
the
think
game
that.
with the damage. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there's always a confliction of players are playing something this way, and then you look at it and you're like, it shouldn't behave like that. But
It does seem weird when a mine goes off that it wouldn't target like if it's not if it's an air of effect skill, you would think it would happen at where the mine is rather than in the
Yeah.
distance. So that sort of seems natural to me to fix that.
Mm.
Like there's a certain appeal to what makes sense going on in some cases, which I actually appreciate that as an us. Like some people would kind of like, oh, the balance is the only thing that matters, but I actually sort of think like I care a lot about like this thing seems like it should do this thing this way, so therefore it probably should actually do it that way. And we should just balance accordingly rather than the other way around. You know, kind of, and I think there's a very good like argument to as therefore that things should target on top of like that an AoE skill should target on top of the mine rather than in the distance for that reason.
Getting away from the negatives, since we know the reservations are there, we don't know exactly how they work. Do you mind explaining how the mine auras and reservations works and why people who, like me, might be a bit dubious about it should be excited for the mine changes?
Well, while you have the mine has a flat. The skill itself has a flat cost. That is costed as reservation. Those costs are very low, like relative to other skills. They are much lower. I do believe it's going for something like if you have a full 20 to 25 mines out, you're on like an in-game character. You're probably reserving 20 to 25% of your mana. And so if you do have, say, 75% reserved, there's enough to throw every single mine there. They're not outrageously expensive that in most cases, you're hitting the mine limit before you're hitting a reservation limit.
Right. But the things they do are important, right?
Yes. So for the auras, I mean, it's, say, can't even remember the name of the mine. Stormblast Mine has increased damage taken aura, and it's at, say, 3%. I can't remember if that's their current value.
So if you fire, if you put a pile of mines on something, it can be worth not detonating them and using other skills. Like it's actually a substantial, important thing. Where and of course they support their own damage, so that means that you want to put a big pile in there, and the more you do, they sort of have a I don't know. I don't think it's technically exponential, but it's it's those kinds of effects where like the more you throw, the more damage each one does. So it's worth doing. And in a party situation, it actually makes quite a big difference. What are the other ones?
So, just one more mechanic in there. Yeah. So yes, you get 3% increased damage taken per mine. Let's say 20 mines, obviously you get 60%. 100% increased aura effect puts that to 120%. But there is, of course, a cap to that as well. The main thing there was that it shouldn't be super trivial for an individual character to hit that limit. It's really there so that if you're playing in a party, you're not getting 6 times 20 Stormblast Mines worth of auras on a thing, and then that's obviously out of control.
Right.
So other ones is, say, the Cold Projectile Mine. Again, it got renamed recently. It is increased chance to receive a critical strike on the monsters. The Pyroclasm Mine.
The fire one.
Names. The fire one is added fire damage taken, and the one of the support gems. There are now 2 support gems that can remote minify. One of them is X% chance to take or receive double damage. So yes, you get to pick or do combinations of them. A lot of the time you won't do combinations. So of the 2 remote mind gems, you can do the one that, say if you wanted to use it on a pre-existing skill, you can make the monsters have a higher chance to take double damage, or you can use the one that just increases the damage more of the mines themselves, and they deal more damage per detonation and sequence.
So that one, yeah, like so as the chain length increases, they do more and more and more damage.
And that is a better option if you do not want to invest anything into, or you don't care about the auras. You don't have to invest into them, of course. They're still good without any investment, but it's another option.
Do you think there's going to be a viable mine support character as like a thing without detonation? They just
It's completely viable, yes. If you want to fully invest in just deploying mines that are, I mean, you'd work it out. You could work it out to say, all right, X of these supported mines, Y of the Stormblast mines, and maybe Z of the other two would result in the highest amount of DPS for the rest of your group. It's an option.
So we don't just become mine podcasts the next 8 hours. Before we move on to like the summoner stuff, just since it's recently been announced, what made you want to nerf the regen on Saboteur by 50%, which is quite a like big change?
I'd say the main reason is that we want, well, aside from it probably being a bit too powerful, and sure, maybe it didn't deserve as much of a nerf as it got, but there are other changes to the tree which hopefully help. The main thing was that we didn't want it to be that if you're playing a trap or mine character that you have to play either Saboteur or Ascendant. That's another thing that comes into play here, and that was the main reason that instigated at least the consideration.
So I mean,
It seems
that
like
is
you're giving
No.
people an opportunity to leech with mines now.
There is
So-
a unique item that does that, yes.
Is there anything like that coming for traps? Because it feels like traps kind of got hard-boned because it's like everything's like mines are sexy. We've got all this cool new sexy mine stuff, and then traps are just like, why am I getting nerfed in the minor change? You know.
We have done some minor buffs to traps, to the trap skills themselves, and to the supports and stuff like that. But no, we haven't given them leech. So yes, I guess in the case of the Saboteur nerf to that regen, yes, it is hitting them harder than it is hitting miners. Yes. Should we do anything about that? Possibly. I can't be certain. I can't be specific. That's not for me to decide here and now. That's for a discussion and for the team to do together. Yeah.
Right. But you're open to thinking about it?
Oh, of course.
Okay.
I mean, this is why we have alpha. This is why we have all this feedback.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about the league not being ready for alpha 1 week out. To anyone who thinks that 1 week out we're not allowed to make more balance changes.
Yeah, nothing is finished until about 4 hours before deployment time.
Or after.
Then it has to be finished.
4 hours after.
4 hours after deployment time, yes. You can still make changes.
I can't remember if it was 3.7 or 3.6. I think it was 3.7 when you changed that 1 point in Shadow like an hour before the server went live, and you killed everyone's build guides, and that was the most annoying thing in the world. Because we'd all like, this is the final tree, we published all of our videos, that one node change, all of our links were dead. It was like, fuck.
Right.
It was the league
maybe
that, like, what, Essence Drain and everything was getting
Yeah,
buffed too, so
3.6, I
so
think.
many people wanted to play Shadows.
I think that wasn't me.
You get a disclaimer
Good on
responsibility for that one, right?
No, there's a good chance. My bad. Yes, there's a weird thing where we announce something and players are unhappy or plan around it, and we do change it based on the feedback.
But then there's also been times when we had to nerf something after it was announced, and we didn't even realize we'd nerfed it because it was like wasn't there like a +1 skills to something where there's like it was on one of the items in the original page.
That was Syndicate. It was like +1 totems and +1 curse chest.
That was something where like it was on a spoiler item, but then but the designers didn't know it was on one of those items, and so then just in the regular course of balance, it just got removed, and then there was like a bunch of people saying that they'd relied on that item having that for like their build.
There is sadly a confliction between the need to
announce stuff,
announcements and teasers and all that, and how it should actually be in game, and sometimes we hit a bit of a problem there where we announce something we probably shouldn't have. Often when that is the case, the community is very quick to tell us about that, so that's good at least. But yeah, that is a sad part of it. It happens, and it's hard to completely avoid.
Right.
Before we move on to the summoner stuff, just to clarify for the last time, because me and Octavian both play a lot of traps, there's a small possible maybe chance that you might you could have miners have 10% regen, and maybe trappers could be like 15 if you want to bring it down a little bit.
Right.
But maybe that could be a separate number.
Tarke,
I'm
just gonna be a
sure. I'm
miner
sure there'll
boy.
be a discussion after this podcast.
Everything's always possible.
Okay. All right. So getting onto the summoner stuff, I know Raiz is super excited for that. So also another question we had a lot of, how did you guys decide which art types you wanted to focus on for this patch? Like what motivated the decisions?
So I mean, a lot of it is just like what needs attention, right? Like what are people complaining about? And like summoners are always complaining, so therefore that is definitely an archetype we realized that we needed to treat.
Speaking of things,
yeah.
Speaking of things nobody is playing, are there any changes, any attention being paid to animate weapon? Or is it remaining in its dark and cobweb corner?
That's
Or
something I haven't heard about in a long time, I have to say. But so yeah, I have, it's not been on my radar. I have to admit, animate.
Do blighted enemies drop weapons?
No.
No.
Kill it.
That's not me. That's Octavian. I don't ask about animate weapon. I'm okay, summoner guy.
I have personally wanted to change animate weapon to not 100% rely on item drops existing.
But it just is so not right, though, like to do that, right? Like this, it's just like you're removing the entire like theme of the skill, and like hence the argument here between us. You know what I mean? Like it's just yeah. Like I'm the kind of person who was angry when specters like were changed, so you didn't have to like go and get a specter every time it died, because like it just didn't feel right. I mean, obviously I understand for the game it's better to have it be that way. I understand, right? Like I'm not arguing we shouldn't have done that. I mean, I approved it, obviously, right? Like that's a thing that I'm fine with doing. But it's the kind of thing that in my heart I'm like, it's like it's thematically worse to like not have to like raise a specter from a corpse every time. You know what I mean? So like that's the kind of thing where it's like, you know, yeah. And I think animate weapon hasn't gone through the like. You know, that the process of being acceptable theme wise to not have to require an item to raise a.
We'll get there eventually,
right? perhaps. So.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
And as for its viability and blight, same problem. I can tell you one thing I don't like doing: just arbitrarily dropping a whole bunch of weapons from things because that
of
skill
weapon,
must be playable in this league.
Exactly.
I mean, it just adds mess for no reason.
Right.
It's sad, but yeah, no immediate solution there.
Right.
I'm sorry, that was a downer on the start of the minion discussion.
Yeah,
what
thanks,
else did
Octavian. You ruined the entire. No.
My bad.
I won't even ask about SRS now because we want to move to the positives, right?
Wow.
Raiz has been literally every single patch. It doesn't matter what you add. The first thing Raiz says is, "This is a fucking nerf to SRS." Ugh.
Control F SRS.
I think one thing we've done for SRS, I don't even know if you're going to like this or not, is if you target an enemy while using the skill, then that enemy is the SRS's focus, like priority target. So if you want to effectively focus fire. Now, this actually came up in Legion where people were trying to get the SRS to kill the chests or generals, and they were just going everywhere. That was kind of the solution to that, but of course works in every regard anyway. Yes. Right. So
it's interesting because
want them to, go for
it. It's interesting because it was initially like that, and then there was an AI change that changed it to now kind of allow like 2-3 SRSs to attack the main target, and then for the rest to go on and kind of find the rest of the pack. So yeah, but I thought, Mark, why that change when we're getting marked for death? You can just seemingly point everything to everything.
Well, that's it. That's pointing everything to everything. I mean, I guess you control here, and that you can do, or you can more actively change with the SRS. But it's true. I don't actually believe that support gem had been designed internally when we had made this change to Summon Raging Spirit. I think they were completely separated. And now, yes, of course, you can say that it's made one of those is made redundant, but the behavior necessary, or at the very least, this gives you more control.
Right.
And of course, doesn't bottleneck you into using the support gem if you don't want to.
Right. Isserus is such a weird summon ability. Like it's just such a in a weird
It's
place.
just
You know?
We know you don't like it. Okay.
I mean, it's not that I don't like it. It's just a weird. So I actually do like it when things like cross boundaries like that. Like it's a summon skill that's like kind of more like. I mean, people kind of want to use it more like fireball in a way. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of weird in that way, but it's just.
Yeah.
But it's like it's kind of cool because it's like you're making a skill that's like balanced with one system, but acts like a different system. And I actually do quite like skills like that. Like I think they're kind of interesting.
You could say that you could argue they're sort of homing projectiles. You could say that it's kind of just a
but they feel more
unique way.
They feel more like projectile summons, you know, like that, and that's the sort of that's why they're kind of in a weird place to balance. I mean, it's like you simultaneously get this like really interesting skill, but also like a problem with balance at the same time. So you know, but then that's for you guys to deal with. I don't have to worry about that. So you know, I'm good.
with summoners now,
like with all the other summoners' abilities, minion stuff, like they're better.
Yeah. So I mean, summoners are getting a very nice buff this time, and you know the biggest buff to summoners that was the first one we decided to do also was the new skill bar stuff, and was something that summoners have always been. Obviously, it's going to affect everyone in terms of like you know everyone's happy about that. It's something that we specifically did because summoners are often complaining about running out of. So you know, yeah, that's another good buff to summoners that I think people will be happy with.
For sure.
How exactly does it work? Because we haven't seen it in action.
Oh, so basically, you just when you press control. Okay, so basically, the default is that when you hold control, you can it uncovers effectively like changes the skill bar at the bottom to be a separate set of skills, and then like T changes to control T and all that sort of stuff. But technically, you don't even need to. You can actually have all of those extra skills bound to whatever keys you want. You could actually bind, for example, all of them to like ASD, F, G if you wanted to, like without even having to hold down control if you wanted to. You think so? But control Q, control W, control. So there's effectively more binds for like more things, but like and they're always revealed by holding control. But technically speaking, you can actually just bind them to any keys or any modifier combination you would like. And so
that's amazing because I hate switch bars, so that is like perfect.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, so if you want to do it, but the problem is that you'll quickly find that like we're actually running out of keys on the keyboard at some point for like all the random panels that open up. But then thankfully it means that you could bind like for example you could bind the social screen to like Control S if you wanted rather than just S. So that means you could actually resolve it that way and change it around. So yeah, so now I believe that this is correct. You can actually bind any key now. You can bind to a modifier plus a key instead if you want to. So that sort of opens up. Yeah. So that's basically how it works. The one complaint we did have, and we didn't really have a solution to this, was that you'll often see that thing switching when you hold control to control click stuff into your stash, because like because the default way it looks now is like you're holding that and that thing sort of flickering as you're like pushing control to do that. But I think I kind of don't really. That. Like,
you can rebind that to shift though or something, right? If you want to.
Well, no. The way that it's a little bit complicated with this because of the way that shift is like is obviously shift attack, and like we're kind of and alt does other stuff too. Like that's like items, so it's like kind of control was the only modifier we had, so it kind of made sense for that to be like that. So yeah.
But I rebound shift to spacebar, so I feel like I should be able to use shift.
Okay. I actually there might be some details of this that like aren't 100% flawless, but like at least my spec was that like everything should work as you would hope it would work, and especially the ability to bind all Control Q, Control W type stuff to individual keys was certainly a very important element because I think it will help a lot with people who like have. It just adds more customization, which is good.
Even if it's not perfect, this is amazing. So I'm for it.
Right.
But
so, yeah. And then of course on console, we are changing left trigger to be an extra set of 4 skills, which is not as many as PC get, quite, but it's more. And that I think they'll be happy with as well because they actually have additional constraints where there are some things on PC that you get a dedicated button for, like flares and that kind of stuff, where you don't on console. So having extra blind slots is super important. Yeah. Story.
Yeah, I look forward to it. With
Great.
Two things as a streamer, it's going to be super fun to have to constantly explain to people what you have on your other bars since it's not showing.
Right.
It's like the same thing when you change the auras. to not be shown. It's like what is reserving his mana all the time. So that's gonna be a
Well, I
lot
mean,
of fun.
a lot of I suspect some people will just put auras on that control bar if they already had enough bind slots, and they just put them there, and then now they don't have to
Yeah.
like worry about it around. So that's good.
With the summoners, is there more of a focus on kind of them being using every single minion? Because before people would mostly specialize into skeletons or specifically zombies or specters. Now it seems like you've removed a lot of the ascendancy points for something like that. Like for instance, skeletons don't have the 100% hit chance. Are we intended to use more than just one type of summon?
I wouldn't say so. This is again what originally inspired removing the Spectre only, zombie only, skeleton only notables was the feeling of if you want to play a summoner, you have to pick that class. Now, probably you're still going to, realistically. But so it wasn't so much to solve what is actually chosen there, but the perception of feeling bottlenecked. Are you going to play more of them? The player choice, but I suspect that, well, we haven't enforced that in any way. If that is efficient for you, optimal for you, sure, you might want zombies with the defensive stance. I can't remember the name, and then something else with offensive. I mean, that's something.
That's something that I felt was quite cool. Actually, when I was playing a testing version of that, I actually was surprised how much sort of interest you get with setting different minion types to different defensive and offensive stuff, and also the way that the targeting thing. I can't remember what it's called again now. The thing where you get to target some people. Marked for death.
Marked for death.
Yeah, the way that works as well and interacts with them and that kind of stuff. Like, it's quite cool the way you can you get quite a lot of interesting controls there just from the support gem system. And I was actually quite happy with that because I really liked the way we integrated it with that rather than trying to do because a bunch of people had random suggestions. Oh, you should have it like Dota where you can like select minions and get them to target stuff and stuff like that kind of thing. And I was never a fan. Like, it didn't feel to me like that was like an action RPG thing to do. And so I was much more interested in seeing how we could leverage the support gem system to achieve some cool results there.
Gem behavior modifier through support gems does make a lot of sense for Path of Exile. You know, it's if you look at something like Fireball or I don't know,
absolutely.
Tornado Shot,
so,
it's the equivalent of like LMP or GMC.
It absolutely is. And so I'm very happy that we managed to achieve that.
But to go back again real quick, we're not forcing you or emphasizing any more to play multiple minion types over one aside from these support gems. That's your choice.
What
if you
about
want to play the golem, it's true, we have added a new golem minion characters mainly, and that's cool. You want to use that.
But I mean, doesn't that incentivize using more? Or...
Sure, I kind of was on the assumption generally you run a golem. I guess a lot of people haven't been lately, but yes, sure. That will incentivize making a golem you actually care about a bit more is good. But it's still your choice. There's no direct incentive for saying you should use skeletons and zombies together. It's entirely up to you how you think you can make it more efficient utilizing support gems, etc., etc.
Why did you agree to Marked for Death? Do you think it's going to be a problem in the future? In the videos that we saw, people were pretty much off-screening Minotaur like a fair distance away. It seems like in the past, a lot of the nerfs to SRS and the targeting would prevent that, but now.
Well, I mean, there's
Death Mark. Sorry.
I don't know if there's something unintended here in terms of attacking from a distance away. You could say that it's the aggression doing that. I mean, high aggro, you can kill stuff from far away. When they're marked for death, they should still obey range relative to you rules. If that's a problem, and maybe that isn't the case right now.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it's the aggro range thing that would be changing that behavior.
Yes.
So yeah, like
it'll be the combination of the aggressive and the mark for death. Yes. Yeah.
As for whether or not that's balanced,
real quick, it's Death Mark. I keep calling it wrong now. I baited you guys into calling it wrong.
Chat's flaming us really hard for
Yeah,
ruining the
Chad is
devs and
going
stuff.
ham.
I mean, hell, we don't even know what the names are, so you know.
Mama
We'll
Um,
find out when Coriander League launches.
yeah.
A
Um,
lot of good names in this one.
Before
one
we
that makes
talk
them
about Toxic Strike, whatever the shit it's called, one thing I did want to ask to backtrack a tiny bit. Since it's very clear that we are running out of keybinds when it comes to PoE, and I know this isn't on the topic list, so you can dodge the question if you want to. How do you feel about the whole like Flask spam stuff, where people are like, please let us just not break our hands, and you know.
This came up recently. In fact, this came up.
What's the last?
Are we
What
doing
was the conversation we're having?
Well, we
about that?
had to discuss. I can't remember the conclusion, but we had discussed, of course, being able to bind multiple flasks to a single key.
Oh yeah, that's right. We were talking about. Yeah.
When did that go?
I don't know. There might be an issue still sitting around.
I think that was happening. I think
Was
it was
it?
getting implemented. And not to say that it was happening for sure, but I do believe an
Okay.
implementation issue was
I don't know.
delegated to someone.
Okay.
Jonathan
Is that
doesn't seem
like
too
a-
convinced on that
big
one.
deal?
Well, it just doesn't. It doesn't mean we're doing it.
It's just, well, I guess my problem with it is, I mean, okay, I don't really have a problem with it as such. It just seems like, is it really even solving the problem? Is my concern. Like, it might just be, oh, that's cool, but it didn't really help. You know, I mean,
That's a
is
good
it really the
question.
case? Is it really the case that sparse spam is really to do with the fact that I always want to use always these classes together? Is that a thing? Or like,
Yeah, that's pretty common. It's the
Right.
whole what's it?
I
The
guess.
paddle pop stick.
Yeah, I mean,
Popsicle stick, yes.
like, I mean,
popsicle stick.
the
I don't know,
popsicle stick,
paddle
like,
board,
yeah.
or the playing a piano. Is that what it is? Yeah. I mean, like it's obviously a common problem or something that players.
I don't know. I guess my
mentioning.
issue with it is talking about solving something like that. Then are we kind of saying it's like a problem we're not really. I feel like it isn't really solving a problem. It's just kind of like dodging the problem in a
yes.
way. You know what I mean? It's like making a thing that's bad easier to be bad rather than like.
No, I agree with that
so-
personally. I've been advocating for a Flask rework for a while, and whenever I mention it, chat
yeah,
calls me an
we
idiot. So.
Probably should do something like that. Actually,
Yes,
it is the thing we should probably do.
That's probably the more correct answer. Hence
yeah.
why I'm saying that other thing is
Right.
there's no assurance to say that that's happening.
Right.
Probably shouldn't have even mentioned it, but
Right.
that's okay. It's the truth. And then, yeah, the correct answer is probably to make flasks not need that kind of behavior in order to be.
You know,
used or
it's not a bad idea. Like a big flask rework is not a bad idea. I don't know whether we'd do it in the near future, but it's not a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks for that. Because we've actually been thinking recently, like, okay, like we're sort of starting to run out of like this is the big problem with Path of Exile type like issues, you know, and like it's kind of there's actually some concern about like is it going to be obvious next time? I mean, there was actually some discussion of this when we were discussing 390 of like it was not entirely clear immediately to us what was the big thing that needed addressing, and we haven't now. Like we've got 390, like what the big balance changes we're doing already. I mean, I'm not going to say the balance changes aside, but we know what area we're focusing. But yeah, there was a bit of concern there initially. Okay, well, it's actually there's nothing that's really jumped the big issue. There were just lots of tiny niche issues, which was a bit of a concern. So yeah, like I don't know, that's another big one maybe. That's worth thinking
That,
about.
of course, being said, we do get a lot of decisions from the community.
Oh, of course,
so,
yeah.
When these things do come up, and hopefully people can raise them. I mean,
Right.
we are watching for it. We are listening for it.
Yeah.
For things effectively, that comes back to it was asked earlier, deciding what archetypes to do. That's a large part of where it comes from.
Yeah.
Is community feedback.
Right.
Well, I mean, the one good thing about that is if in like 3.10 or 3.11 or whenever it happens, if it does get received poorly, you can just blame the podcast guys. Be like, it was their fault. Yeah, it was their fault. You know,
with no culpability whatsoever.
Is there anything you want to touch on when it comes to the Poison Boy stuff, or is that just completely out of your wheelhouse?
It's not really a lot to say, really. I mean, some of it's pretty cool to play and unique. I don't really be too specific. Just there's a good chance I'm just going to say some stuff that's wrong.
Call
Assassin
Rory.
got some stuff. One thing with the Assassin was to make sure it had more utility defense and not just focus entirely on crit and crit damage. So I do believe there's even now 4 points that have nothing or very little to do with crit, or 8 points, 4 notables. So yeah, there's a little bit of a difference there, but that was the goal. A bit more, or give it its own form of kind of defense or utility that was different. So
Okay.
that's about it. Though.
One thing you might be able to talk about a little bit more is obviously 3.7 was the melee rework focus patch. We've seen a lot of complaints about outside of Cyclone it being a bit kind of maybe underwhelming. We've recently seen that you've nerfed the Cyclone range and like the flat damage. Out of interest, how does the team feel about melee after 3.7?
Well, there are still a lot of good skills. Now, look, I don't know how we do still see it. We've seen some Blade Flurry. We've seen some events. We've seen a few bits and pieces. I'd say that what the problem beyond that is that what we're not seeing is a lot of the single target, or what were formerly single target, the strikes. The things that are being, I guess, well, yeah, the strikes. And so, I mean, one thing that came up recently was multi-strike. I do believe we've, reduced the amount of multiplier and multi-strike. We've adjusted the numbers to make it better. I cannot recall exactly what we changed, but that's one thing. We've also added more weapon range on passive tree, which you may have seen, to try and help again with the strikes. I mean,
Did we tell people what we were changing about Cyclone? Has that been announced?
There was a thing that was announced
There
where
was
it's, that it's got a
some
lower
general
range
details.
and it's got lower flat damage.
And it doesn't
The
scale off
main-
weapon range the
yeah.
same way that it used to.
The main thing is the way that the scaling changed with regard to the range. So yeah, so that's the So I mean, look, it's easy to feel like, oh, melee, because people were playing a Cyclone really. But I think that Cyclone kind of just dominated the narrative, and there are a lot of good skills in melee now, much more so than they were before, certainly. So I don't think, I think that it's just that they haven't had their time to shine yet, just because Cyclone was so dominating. But that being said, I mean, we're still making a few adjustments to make sure that we're actually getting some satisfaction there. So, I think it'll be okay. I think it will be all right.
If we don't get it now, we definitely get it. This was our first 3 months with.
It was like a massive change, and it's like with to settle down, with all of those things, like with a couple of balance iterations to get everything back to the right levels. But we'll get there.
I think most people who've played PoE for a long time are kind of used to the fact that it takes a little while to get it kind of sweet and
Right.
I'm just going to try swapping server again because we're still getting random lags. So just give us 1 second. I think we should be back. Okay, one thing I did want to ask, and this is actually related to the multi-strike thing, but this was a question from Carve, specifically to with the way that Val skills function. So I'm just going to read it. There are some skills that you always want to commit to finishing when you use them, so an option to disable animation cancelling would be amazing. So like when you press a Val skill and then you move and you lose all the souls.
I know. We actually, when we were looking through your question list before, we had a quick discussion about this, and we basically said, hey, yeah, we should probably turn off animation cancelling before the contact point for Val skills. Just because, is there ever a case where you actually want to cancel a Val skill? Probably not. Paid the cost. So yeah, we were like, we probably should just change that. So yeah, I mean, do you reckon we'll get that in 3.8 probably? Maybe, I don't know. Whatever. Yeah, we'll probably change that at some point.
We'll try.
You're right. That's a problem. We should fix it.
We'll try. If it's not on the day, it can be.
It's almost certainly trivial if you just assign it to Alex. He'll probably do it in 5 seconds. So yeah, you can probably.
But I think that seemed to be. I didn't really play any melee in 3.7, so correct me, Raiz or Octavian, if I'm wrong. But it seemed that used to be the issue with why strikes weren't being seen that much because people were canceling multi-strike. So if they also had that behavior on multi-strike, more of these strike skills would be seen more because it wouldn't be clunky. So less people would want to play stuff like Cyclone.
It would minimize the clunkiness. I still think there's just that without diluting the identity of something like Heavy Strike or Glacial Hammer to the point where it isn't Heavy Strike or Glacial Hammer anymore, I don't think it's possible to bring it up to the level of smoothness and enjoyable gameplay that something like Cyclone is going to have, and accessibility. But yeah, certainly if it's going to stop
I
itself
still
occasionally, that's bad.
believe it is possible.
I
It is
would love it to
possible.
be.
Right. Just
I
have
would
to,
love to be wrong on that.
we will find a solution. We'll get there. I still think I know there are still problems with the targeting that unfortunately were not and still haven't been fixed. And it's complicated, subtle crap like how we went through in the last podcast, and there's still more stuff to fix. And when we fix all of those things, I think they will suddenly feel better. So, like, I know it is possible to get it to the point where you no longer feel like you can't play those types of skills, and you just have to make playability better. And, like, a lot of people sometimes, I think a lot of people are willing to give up too early on those kind of things. It's like I see this quite often when we're, and this is just like a little bit unrelated to what we were talking about, but I see this quite often where it's like a lot of the time people will dismiss a new skill, and then there'll be like some subtle change, and then now it's like awesome. And like I'm not talking about things like so much in the community, but just like during testing internally, where it's like a skill will feel bad and it's like real bad, and the community will be like, "This will never be good. You should scrap this. It was a failed prototype. We don't like it." And then like a little thing will happen, and suddenly it's like, okay, now it feels great, and it'll be like the most tiny, non-obvious thing, and then suddenly it's better. So yeah, like it's just kind of it's just hard to know sometimes when exactly like when like when things, what it takes to actually make something good, and identifying that like what's the little thing that makes things good is like one of the hardest things in game design, to like really try and identify those tweaks. So I still believe it's possible, and I already know what I want to change about targeting to make single target feel better. It's like a kind of complicated thing to do with making it so the server can understand in advance what fallback targets you would need to have after you finish killing the current target. But I'm not going to go into that whole detail right now. Huh?
I gotta say, I'm glad you're very optimistic on this.
Right. But yeah, like
Because
that's just because I'm just not willing to give up. I know that there are things that can be done. There are. So we'll get it. And then
yeah, no, I agree with you entirely. Like, there's a ton of really satisfying gameplay behind something like Infernal Blow or Dominating Blow or Glacial Hammer, for that matter. And it's just it's locked behind this necessity to have to deal with the clunkiness. And so it feels like I was playing Static Strike recently. It was my last build of Legion, and when I had the Static Strike stacks running and I was zooming around the map, it felt like I was driving in a car and driving real smoothly along at like 70 miles an hour, and then occasionally I'd have to jolt down to 20 miles an hour to slap a thing and then run again. And that's somewhat specific to Static Strike because of the way that it works, but it was really the stopping to have to melee attack something that felt clunky.
Right.
And if you think it's just a couple turning points away from making that sort of thing really functional, that would unlock so much more of the game to someone like me who's jaded and cynical and has 9,000 hours and doesn't want to play something that isn't smooth as butter.
All right.
There's quite a lot of stuff that we can talk about in terms of master skills. So is there anything anyone wants to mention when it comes to like the skills and abilities stuff when we get into the mastery work? I'm going to take that silence as a no. Raiz, is there anything summonery-wise? I don't want you complaining that we didn't get to talk about every
Not so much summoner, but it's very interesting that yet again you're going back to the whole idea of playing around with corpses, with Necromancer, and creating like an entire new thing for that. Did you see maybe that in the past, whenever you implemented skills like cremation, did you need to create an entire archetype around an ascendancy?
A lot of that was driven by also theme, and again trying to be unique. So what can the Necromancer do to be? I mean, it shouldn't be, or it could be. I don't think it should be entirely about summons, and so the next thematic thing that the Necromancer character, if you think of it like a character, is to do with corpses. And so integrating that mechanically was something I thought could be interesting. And we tried it, and I think we ended up with some pretty interesting outcomes. But it's not entirely to be played with. I mean, it should work with summoners, it should work without. I mean, and maybe we want to extrapolate on the corp skills later. I mean, that one was kind of fun to actually sit down and come up with. It was quite challenging. A lot of technical difficulties when you're playing around with corpses in these ways, but it was. I think it's a good result, and I don't know if everyone else agrees, but
Have there been any improvements to like Desecrate cooldown to support that playstyle in 3.8? Because I've tried playing like Detonate dead characters a lot before in the past, and it feels awkward having to use Unearth or not be able to Desecrate enough. And
I think Desecrate cooldown has been removed.
Hang on.
I should probably check that. I can confirm that. I may have dreamt this.
that sounds like a good dream.
That's a good dream.
That's a good
That is a
dream.
good dream.
I think we've removed the cooldown from Desecrate. Oh, I hope I'm not wrong about that one. It still had a yeah. We had a bit of back and forth about making it instant or not and stuff like that. But I think we went with cast time plus no cooldown. I very much hope I'm right about that. Otherwise, my bad.
Well, if the other option is instant cast, we're happy to. Trust me.
I think I'd rather have
Either
no
one of
cooldown.
those is good.
But both are
Yeah.
good. But yeah, I mean, if it's not true,
I-
we'll be disappointed, and that's fine.
I played a Detonate Dead character, and it was beyond aggravating. So I know the pain.
Okay. Perfect.
It's so
Out of
satisfying when
interest,
it
just
works,
how
though.
do you feel about the whole? Because I've tried to make Detonate Dead work a few times, and whenever I use it, I feel like I'm dumb for not just using Volatile Dead because it's just a smoother gameplay.
Well, yeah. Yes. I was
Counterpoint.
when I did it, it was a stubbornness and kind of a look. I like to sometimes just pick a skill and just be like, I'll see if I can make it work. Are people right about this? Am I wrong about this? Am I right about this, etc.? I mean, the way to really know for me to feel or be certain about that is to play it all the way through and feel like I've done everything I can. And yes, I mean, step one was the corpse. I mean, if you're playing slow enough, I'm sure the Desecrate cooldown isn't a problem. But you don't want to be doing that. So, yeah, it was an issue. And this, I'd say that kind of play style, that playing that inspired me a little bit more as well when doing the Necromancer, kind of thinking what could be cool, what would be cool for that kind of character. Yeah.
Vol Detonate Dead. That's why you play Detonate Dead.
It is a good
Fair
skill.
enough.
It's fun. Yeah.
It's a very good. I love pressing that button.
It's a good button, especially when you don't have a cooldown on Desecrate.
Oh
Mm.
yeah. You've gotten us very excited. I sure hope you're not.
It better not have been a dream, eh?
Too
I
late.
got myself
Too late now.
excited.
Hey,
what
you-
was? Oh, go ahead. Raiz.
You did say that there's always enough time to change everything. So, if you
Sure,
dreamt it
yeah,
up.
Yes. All of this is gonna. If I've been wrong about any, it's gonna come up on.
Yeah, he'll just like change it
tomorrow.
on Monday morning and then
Yeah.
make it as we've said.
Getting into actually, I'm just gonna say one thing. Explosive arrow used to be a really fun skill. At some point, if if you need a patch to focus on, just make a whole patch on explosive arrow. Like, dude,
Okay.
I miss explosive arrow.
Maybe knights in general or something that could use a little bit of work.
Hmm.
And Tarke, next on the docket. What did you have?
Okay. But just one briefly thing on the explosive arrow thing. I made a point of complaining about this a few podcasts ago, and Raiz made a massive point about how it was fine, and then he made a point of playing it. How did that go again, Raiz? Just to recap.
It didn't go so well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Explosive
okay.
arrows in a rough spot.
We'll fix it.
All right. So getting into the Master Mission side of things, since there's been a lot of concern about how this could maybe play out, do you mind explaining just exactly how the new generation of Master Missions will work, so everyone understands in 3.8?
All right. Well, the basic thing we wanted to do was make it so that we no longer had the problem where people felt like as soon as they find a master, they have to do it immediately right now. And the way we want to do, but we also didn't want to completely take that away because we wouldn't like. There's still this thing where like when you're playing a map, you want like interesting things to just happen from time to time. So basically, what we want to do is balance down the number of masters that you get and that you encounter in maps just naturally, and then balance up the number of master missions that you can explicitly do yourself. But the problem that we had is that the existing system we had for that, which was to say having the maps where you have to go to a specific map and play it, unfortunately required too much. Like a lot of people were complaining basically that I then have to get a lot of specific maps that I can't get. So that was when we basically come up with the idea of making it so that we you can put the map in the master, effectively run it similarly to how you might pick a Zana mod, except that it's like picking the master type, and then you can run those missions, and you've got to effectively have, it's not completely unlimited, but you have effectively unlimited storage of how many of them you can store up for later, meaning that you can just play that content whenever you feel like it. So if you can just not play incursion for a while and then come back a bunch of time later and be like, you know what, I'm going to do all my incursions now, do a bunch of incursions because I want to get this specific incursion unique or whatever it is. So yeah, effectively, every time you play a map, there is it a chance or is it a chance that you get a new master mission spawning of some type, and they are divided into 3 tiers, so that if you play white maps, then you get white master missions, and if you play yellow maps, you get yellow master missions, and play red ones, you get red ones. And that's so that you can't just play a bunch of white maps and then get master missions and red maps. And those will just save up for a long time. You also get how many per day? 2 per day, daily missions as well. And those will just stack up while you're not logged in, I believe.
Is that
Yeah,
2 individual or 2 full sets?
2 individual.
2 out of the
yeah,
Okay.
2
out of 5.
individual. 2 out of 5.
Yeah.
Right. So that is replacing the existing daily thing that we had, which I can't remember exactly how that worked, but yeah. So that's the basic idea. Is there anything more about that you sort of want to clarify?
So the big thing that when people found out about that was, will there be a situation? Ziz said on his stream right away he's going to make like 10 accounts, so that if you get an account.
So the only concern that I have is Nico. I think that the other ones are not a problem because you kind of have to still really play those. Like you're effectively just playing the content anyway on a different account, so it doesn't really change anything. But the difference with Nico, of course, is that you're effectively earning play time in Delve on a different account than the one you actually have to play that you get to play it in. And so that's the reason why we probably have to do something about it. I don't know exactly what form that fix will be quite yet. But we're probably going to do something about it. And another interesting story about this, by the way, that someone just worked out quite recently is that the first implementation of dailies that was implemented had when you do a league migration, like a league merge, like what happens when you migrate solo self-found to your primary thing. The default was that you just add the dailies from one to the other, and then people realized that actually after that was implemented, there's actually a way that this could be pay to win, because then you could buy a lot of private leagues and then earn dailies in all the private leagues that you're not actually playing in, and then migrate all of those private leagues to your standard league, to your regular league, and then that would get you all the dailies across. So then when we realized we can't actually merge those after all. They have to just be discarded when you do a league merge.
I mean, to be honest, that doesn't seem any more pay to win than just making like 50 accounts.
Well, no, but it is, because you can make accounts for free. But the difference is you can't actually migrate them into one.
No,
whereas
but
you can when you
it's slightly less aggro, but you can just make the map on an alt account. It's more busy work, I guess, because you have to open it on the other character and invite to groups and stuff. But
it's similar to making multiple accounts, but at least.
But the difference is, like, okay, effectively, if we did allow that, then it would just be completely like, yeah, you pay a bunch of money and now you get like this advantage. So yeah, that we obviously couldn't allow that. So the that was like the thing. So yeah, they unfortunately don't merge from SSF. If you do an SSF merge, that's a thing you will lose. I don't think there's anything else you currently lose when you migrate from SSF. So that is now the only thing. But that's just a random side note. I get the concerns about making multiple accounts, but I'm pretty sure it's only Nico that has the problem. So yeah, we'll probably just come up with something about that, and then we'll have a rule. I don't know what the rule is quite yet, but we'll come up with one. Yeah.
one other little specific mechanic about that is when you open the map in your hideout, it will still open the map at your map device location. So you don't have a whole bunch of portals open around every single master. And it will allow you to input fragments, Zana mods, etc. It's just run like every other map. So
Oh, okay. That's
it's
cool.
not like the old, if you consider the old Zana daily, where it would just open a map, it's a map with 0 modifiers, or the randomly generated Zana ones, whereas this will be, you can do whatever map you want with, well, any non-unique map.
Yep. If it's just as the master to whatever map you would otherwise run as you would normally run it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So it takes the Atlas forward in every other respect as well, like influence and that sort of thing.
Yep,
and
all the other things. So it's
do you
effectively
also
it's just
have
like
a-
running a regular map. It just
Okay.
adds this extra thing on top.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So yeah, it's just easy to choose what you want to do now.
Just to clarify, since chat is really struggling to grasp this and they're spamming, just to confirm, how many master missions do you get daily, guaranteed?
2.
2,
which
chat.
is less, yes.
Yeah, they said
is
2 the
less
first
It is
time.
less. It is less. It is true. However, the difference is that before you would lose a lot of them just due to the fact that you might not necessarily have the map or whatever. So I've kind of found that in practice, like you tend to get more or like similar or more than what you would have before in terms of actual practical result. So yeah.
For most people, it's going to be above. Chat just if you lower a number, chat isn't going to be happy. It's just how they work.
Yeah, I understand. I
Um,
understand. But yes, like this was one of those things where it did come up of like they should understand that like in practice it really is like better than before in terms of number of missions you get to run.
One thing I'm curious about, since Nico keeps coming up as an issue, how do you feel about the fact that people have such a preference on, I want to be playing this one master and I don't want to be doing these other masters? Is that an issue to you?
I'm pretty sure we've talked about this before in another podcast where like the thing that we said at that time was basically like if you actually were playing Delve 100% of the time, then you would not want to keep doing that for that long. And that's basically still the answer there is like, it isn't a game mode that will actually support you playing it for like literally an entire league worth of time. So yeah, that is the thing that and then what we still believe about it. So
it is also the case that there is nothing saying that one master can't be more preferable or better, or however you want to word it, than the others.
Right.
Where we could try and make them equal, that's always going to remain the case anyway, and is up to anyone's preference anyway.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, you can play it forever if you're willing to buy the scarabs, but it's just that it's got an economic cost to you at that point. And so if it becomes the most popular thing, then the scarab prices go up, and whatever. It's sort of self-balancing in that way by adding some trade to the system.
Do you worry that you'll ever end up in the situation that we had in Delve, where because originally it wasn't a set amount of sulfite nodes, it was like 1 to 3. And the idea was that when 3 spawned, people were like, yay, I got 3. Whereas most of the time people would be like, no, I only got 1. Do you worry you'll end up having the same issue, like, oh, I didn't get Nico, shit league, you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, that is for the case of dailies. That will be a negative experience if you are looking for Nico like that. I mean,
you'll get many more from playing maps than you will from every day. It's like that is not going to be your primary source of master missions is the dailies. You know what I mean?
Are the missions categorized specifically by tier or just category of maps? So if I'm running like a T3 map and I get a mission, can I then do it in a T5 map? Like it's still within white map tiers?
Yes,
or
it's just
T12 to a 15.
It's white, yellow, red. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can technically play a bunch of tier 1s and then actually play them and get and earn missions that you could then do in tier 5. But I mean, those gradations, that kind of three group thing has kind of worked well for other places where we've used it in the map system for like what do you call them?
Sextants.
That's the one, sextants and stuff like that. So we're quite happy with that being how it works. Yeah.
There was a point in the development where we didn't have those, and it was, you could run T1 maps to generate masters to then run on T16.
Yeah, and that was not okay.
Yes, we did have.
I can imagine.
Have that for a little while internally.
I honestly have, my slight concerns about T11s being basically kickstartable into T16s, where if you have
Right.
the Atlas completion, you have the resources, you can speed farm a shaped T11. That's a nice layout. I don't know what the new Atlas looks
Do you have
like,
any
but
concerns about
if
that,
it's
Mark?
whole or something.
I mean, it is a strategy that people might want to do. At the end of the day, running that T11 still takes time. True, you're still, if you're, the main concern originally was just heading straight for the boss, killing the boss, because that's map completion, which will trigger the generation. And then, of course, if you're doing this in 11s, I mean, you're still putting in the time. Why not to do that in 15s? Sure, you could, and in the case of, sure, you say a toll, it's layout based. I mean, what is the time difference in running a T11 to the boss versus a T15 to the boss with some level of character? Why do the 11 over the 15? How much faster is it really? And then does that quantify to actually be a better result than if you had just done the 15 and done the masters from there? Like, it's, I mean, if you think it's substantially faster, sure, I don't necessarily agree with that. There are probably some cases where you could run an 11 and run a 15 if they were of the exact same map. If your character's strong enough, they're going to be very, very minute amount of different player time or of completion time.
True.
Maybe you disagree, and of course that's going to vary from character to character and build to build, and of course from tile set to tile set or map to map.
I think that when we're looking at these sorts of things, Mark quite rightly tends to look at what is the situation for a top tier player, and that's partly because it's also the top tier players that are optimizing in this way in the first place. So yeah, in the case where it's like if you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to play a bunch of tier 11s in order to get stuff for tier 16, I absolutely think he's correct that for any type of player that would be thinking that way, it's probably just as advantageous for them because they've got high enough DPS anyway to play tier 15. So yeah.
Well, I think
running 11s to run on 16 makes more sense, of course, because killing a tier 16 map boss takes longer than a tier 15 map boss. Right. Quite substantial. Well, generally, quite a time difference, and in which case, yes, the running 11s to run on 16s, but
you were just saying why not run the tier 15s instead? Like you run 15s to run 16s. Yeah?
Sure. At what point? I mean, I guess that's then a different question of the value of running a tier 11 versus the value of running a tier 15, regardless of the mission bonus. Is it worthwhile? Is it not? I mean, depends what you're after, what you're trying to achieve. So
I don't want to dig down the rabbit hole too far because we probably have some other topics. It was more for me just a question of dilution of the value of the highest tier maps in the since you're able to effectively, because Zana missions are so valuable and Nico is so good if you're at I-83 Delve and all that, where you're in a T11 content, but you're effectively generating T16 content off to the side from it as you're doing that. And like over the course of a month, 2 months into the league, that's going to heavily dilute the value of top tier maps if a lot of people are doing it.
Sure, the good benefit here is you're not just running the 11 delving, you're still running the T16. You're still doing the T11 to generate the mission for the T16 to then do the T16 master mission.
Wouldn't you have problems with just generating tier 16 maps though if you're playing a bunch of tier 11s and not playing tier 15? Like surely there's a problem there with that getting the map.
Map. I mean, that's it wouldn't be so much that you're going to have a problem sustaining T16s as it would that you're going to have an influx of T11s. I mean, you're still running the T16 and hopefully getting the T16s from that. So it would be relatively the same. Yeah. The main thing is you're still doing that T16. You're not skipping from tier 11s to Delve, and that's okay. And if that's more efficient for you, sure. Our only potential solution to that, and again, we don't have to solve this now. We don't have to solve it this week.
It might not even end up being a problem.
It might not be a problem. It might be, and honestly, I'd be curious to see someone entirely try and quantify this entire scenario and work out what's beneficial and what isn't. Maybe the league content. I mean, for any given league, not just relative to Blight, but maybe the content, the league content is beneficial enough that running a T16 is something you want to do instead of running the T11, and so then that's something to say. Now the don't want to do the T11s. There's enough variables here. It's going to shift. We can solve it later if it becomes a problem. It's
I didn't see it as a glaring problem with the league, more as just an interesting way of trying to abuse, I guess, the master.
Well,
That's what I like about this game.
It lets you see a little bit about how the discussions and tend to go about this kind of thing. This is quite similar to the kind of, we haven't had this exact discussion, me and Mark, but it's the kind of discussions that we have quite often about, and this is often, the kind of thing that we talk about, right? So that's the game design process, Yeah.
It's like in a card game, sort of tempo versus value, whereas just running the T11 to generate the T16s is the value-oriented way of playing the game, where you're getting those free T16s for only having to do T11 content, whereas staying 100% of your time in T16s is always being in the highest tempo, so to speak, content where you're getting the most value for your time spent.
Yeah.
Anyways, Tarke had other topics. I'm sorry, I derailed things.
Also, I think it's one of those things, just to briefly summarize, it goes back to the reason why you made this change originally was for the game to feel smoother for players to play. And it would suck if you're in the situation where you don't run tier 13 maps, you don't run tier 7 maps, but you've got all these missions stuck on a particular tier. So by having the flexibility of running it on any yellow or any red, then it will feel better. Right. So for the player, it's the better end result. We haven't actually got that much more left on the topic list, so feel free to ramble to your heart's content. Right. But one thing I was particularly interested in is in 3.8 we are seeing the reintroduction of synthesis bosses, but not the synthesizer. How exactly will the boss loot work? Because you're meant to synthesize it and stuff.
Well, yeah, just to cover all the points again. So synthesis, it's a partial integration. There are parts that aren't coming, but what will be available is through Zana Atlas missions. You can, in the same way you can find Untainted there, one of the maps she can offer can be one of the distant memories from synthesis, as in the form of a unique. That unique map will have randomly generated mods as if it was an island or one of the islands in synthesis. So it'll have a bunch of damage mods and whatnot. It won't have fixed mods. It'll also have some of the additional special mods, like the memory modifier mod. So you can get some of that on there. They're not customizable. You're given what you're given. So it can be more rewarding than normal as a result. That unique map will have obviously the synthesis monsters, the synthesis boss. There's one of 5, the 4 bosses below, and then the Cortex boss. And the main thing here is that we wanted to integrate, of course, the bosses, the gameplay content of fighting these. A lot of work goes into these fights, and to see them just not go in afterwards is a little bit sad. So getting to have them in the game is good for everyone to see, including us. But the main thing was to add the unique items to the game. Now, the unique items, obviously, some of them require to be synthesized. Well, I wouldn't say require, but they should be synthesized, the rings in particular. These will drop synthesized with random parameters. Well, again, random with some rules that we've specified. So you'll get the rings dropping synthesized with, I guess, kind of random implicits or random synthesized implicit outcomes. Sometimes they'll be very good. Sometimes the implicits won't be very good. That's just how it's going to be. Same for the others. They will not drop any standard fractured items. Obviously, there's no synthesizer. We'll have to revisit the other parts of synthesis in terms of integrating them into the game. We're going to revisit that later to see what we want to do. We weren't certain, but we knew we wanted the uniques in the game. We knew we wanted the boss fights in the game. So yeah, we might change that later, but for now, yes, you'll get them, and you'll get them synthesized already. So they could be very, very, very good by chance. So there's a lot of randomness on the drops of those.
Any idea about the rarity? You mentioned Untainted Paradise. Is it comparable in rarity?
It is comparable, yes. I think it's even exactly comparable right now.
Oh well,
Mm.
that's pretty rare.
Relatively rare.
Yes.
Actually, that's a bit rarer than I was expecting.
There's a week left. Not to say we're going to change it. The intention was that they're quite rare, and thus the uniques will hold some rarity and hold some value. That being said, given them being randomly generated synthesis implicits, there's room to give more of than there is to make them extremely rare. We can obviously revisit those values and or the chance of them spawning.
I mean, I think the main motivation for us was getting the boss fights in, because it's a real shame when you've got some really awesome boss fights that just weren't, just being wasted, languishing, and we didn't really have a good way to integrate them. Synthesis didn't really have a great way to integrate it. So therefore, we were just like, hey, let's just get these in, and have something to be used. I actually, like, you mentioned the synthesizer, of course. Like, I actually think the synthesizer was kind of cool in a lot of ways. Like, when some players obviously had issues with how it worked and wasn't very discoverable and that kind of thing. But I still think that it was a cool system, and I don't want to waste that either. So maybe one day we'll actually be able to find a good place for it. We just don't have a place for it quite now. So, yeah, I think that's all right.
Just quickly, I want to come back to the synthesizer point though, but if it's going to be something which we might only see maybe 1, 2, 3 times a league, depending on how much someone plays, do you then have the concern that if they're spawning with mods, you might have the situation where, like, this is the only boss you encounter, and it's like, yo, GMP minus max, get fucked,
Yeah, that can happen. It is. I would say. I would say it is too rare right now. I'd like to keep it quite difficult. I mean, it adds some suspense to then. Yes, they're going to be hard. I can tell you now this week, it's almost certainly will revisit. Almost certainly make them more common. I just can't say how much. I just know internally that it is currently comparable directly to Untainted Paradise, but
yeah.
We're repeating this a little bit, but there's a week left.
Yeah.
Okay. Getting back to the synthesized point, this was actually one thing I really liked. We kind of skipped over this. So with the anointment system, you actually see the result before you spend your oils. I'm guessing that was a lesson you directly learned from synthesis.
I mean, not exactly. We kind of, like, sure, it's something that we certainly like, that people were unhappy with in synthesis. But we've had leagues and before synthesis that did this kind of thing. And there have been and there will probably be leagues after synthesis that don't tell you certain things. It just comes down to sort of flavor and theme and all that sort of stuff, right? Like, I mean, we probably lean more showing more information rather than less in general over time. But at the same time, like, yeah, I mean, yeah, I sometimes we like to have a few things that are a little bit mysterious, right? As much as maybe that's like something the players don't like, but sometimes we like to be a little mysterious. And in the case of the oils, we didn't feel it was necessary for that system, so yeah, we decided to make it not mysterious at all, and you can actually see it on the passive tree and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that is something that we did.
While I agree it's fun, and personally, like, I prefer it because I don't mind taking the time to read up on it, but obviously most people don't want to have to refer to a third-party thing.
Right.
How do you think the reaction to synthesis would have changed if it was the exact same system, but before people went to craft, they could see the possible outcomes? Do you think people would have the same problems with it, or?
I think that it was still too complicated for a system that was introduced that early. I think that it needed to be a system that would come in. I think it's a late game crafting system. So therefore, I don't think that would have saved it, if you know what I mean. But I mean, yeah, like,
it would have been more preferable to more people.
Right, but I don't think it would have been the thing that would have saved it personally. Maybe Mark II disagrees.
It was it's same thing. It was too complicated too early.
Yeah.
Amongst other problems, of course, like the rate you're getting fractured items early, and it generally found a place later in game, but only once a lot of people removed a lot of the complexity by figuring everything.
Right.
You mentioned mystery. Are you happy with the implementation of timeless jewels? A little broad.
Overall, yeah. As you pointed out, broad. I mean, is there something specific? I mean, I honestly didn't engage with them too much. And
Just
in
mostly, I
development.
think, availability. Like people obviously had a pretty hard time getting the right ones for them. Is that now that they're
It
most
is
likely going to be rare?
it is
Are you
true we are
looking?
making them much, much, much rarer by well, not directly, but in the sense that Legion's becoming bonus content, not in every single zone, in the same way that Breach did, and so on. And so, whether or not the correct amount of those jewels are going to be given out, it's probably on the low end, considering the amount of random that's needed. I suspect. That is another thing that's going to also get looked at or reviewed in the future.
Mhm. Okay.
One trend we've seen for, I think, basically every league since Incursion is new leagues giving access to older content. And it seems every single league's giving more and more access, and obviously I think Legion was like the extreme of that, where it was just like, we give you everything from the previous leagues. What motivated that decision? And will we see that again in Blight, where it's just like, here's all the old items?
It's pretty, yeah, that's pretty much the same, and that we're going to be giving prior content. I mean, the way to look at it is that if you didn't play them as leagues, then they're just content. They're part of the game. They're not necessarily, they aren't a former league. They're just the game's content now because they've been migrated or integrated into the game through various measures. And so, yes, the leagues are giving the reward on or on giving rewards on all the axes of other the other game content, right? So, um, ultimately, yes, what I guess I'm saying is that will continue current trend.
It's part of it is because it's a lot easier for us to design. Like, we've had problems in the past where the reward, it was hard for us to make things feel rewarding enough. And by the sort of modern systems we've had about, like, you can see icons for what kind of rewards you might get and that kind of stuff have tend to be quite popular. So it's something that we've liked to do. And having league content like that show up, it's much easier to, like, okay, so like, what would it be if we were just like, okay, there's icons for things, but we weren't using any of the previous league content? It's like, okay, so we get like swords and armors. I mean, it doesn't really work, you know what I mean? Like, you kind of have to have something interesting to search for, and so that's the reason why it's kind of tended to happen, I think. But we only actually generally use the content that's still easily available. Like, we don't generally like drop stuff that's like that's hard to get from other leagues, I think. Would you say?
I'd say an example of a mistake we made there is we've given too many breach stones through
Right.
non-breach.
Well, you certainly shouldn't feel
Um,
like you're getting more of the thing the league originally gave from not the league than from it, right? Like, it should be that like most of your breach stones come from breach and you get a few extras from the other things. And so that's sometimes we can get the balance a bit off from there. Like, the theme should still be with the thing that originally dropped it, but yeah, you just get a few from other cases.
Of course, the major exception being talisman.
Yeah.
Since all talismans are now from non-talisman content because
Right.
we didn't
integrate
talisman really at all.
That is true.
Except for that one, well, no, we didn't.
I didn't even realize what drops talismans now.
Rigworld map. They're just rewards
Yeah.
or either part of the jewelry reward or part
Right. Okay.
of, or there's just specific talismans that
Right.
drop.
I actually,
So kind of.
oh, sorry, go on. I was just gonna say, I remember my reaction when there was the announcement that Legion was being rolled into the game at a 10%. Is I can't wait until 4.x where I get most of my Legion content from whatever patch that is. So,
I don't think that should be the case.
okay.
I don't think that should be the case. Yeah. Like, sure, there was a mistake with a few cases, but we're trying to, I don't know if we can come with a rule of thumb for like what percentage of a given league's rewards should come from that league and what percentage should not. But maybe we should actually formalize that at some point internally so that we're understanding exactly where we're at. It's probably a rule that's worth following.
Yeah. I don't want to keep you on for too long, but I think one topic which would be a kind of spicy one to maybe wrap up on, which we saw a lot of debate about in the last league, the state of Headhunter in the game, and do you think it has a healthy place? And are you worried that Blight will just be guy in middle with Headhunter, a mega lol, the entire league sort of thing?
Well, I don't think that it's going to have the same problem that we had with the last. Like, that was particularly. I mean, that was that. I don't think that we really anticipated that because we weren't thinking about it, and now that Headhunter's back in the spotlight, I think that we're thinking about it more with regard to specific defenses to it with the content we're making.
We have, at least for Domain of Timeless Conflict, which is where the first Headhunter and the domain kind of I think that's what first brought up or highlighted Headhunter being in the state it's in. I mean, that made it the big deal it was. We've addressed that to a degree in that we've made the rewards from Domain of Timeless Conflict have diminishing returns, but start a lot higher. So you don't have this need to have this ultimate, well, as an extreme ultimate character. I mean, it's still beneficial, of course. I mean, you're still getting more rewards, but there'll be a smaller divide between again average and extreme with Headhunter. So at least in the Domain of Timeless Conflict, I feel like we've mitigated a lot of that. There'll also be a lot less need to pay some all-powerful character to do it for you, just so that you can get the drops and thus get more credit, because them running it plus is more beneficial than you running it, and even including the cost that you'd pay them to do. So hopefully that is addressed. That's not directly Headhunter, but it kind of is. As for Blight, it's not going to have the same impact there. But yeah, it's a tricky one. It's come up a lot in the past, Headhunter. Do we nerf it? Do we not? You know, these questions have happened, these discussions have happened, and it hasn't been trivial.
I mean, I don't think we're doing any kind of nerfing this patch.
No, we're not. Just to be clear, we're not nerfing it. I'm just saying it's come up, and that you occasionally get this or some extreme case happening, and it's like, do we need to address this? Generally, no. Actually, generally, what it implies is that we're spawning way too many rare monsters, which, you know, Legion had a lot of them. Legion had a lot of them in a short period of time where you could fully utilize the buff stolen.
I mean, Legion was unusual in how good it was for Headhunter. Like I don't necessarily think that the average league's going to have the same kind of problems. So, I mean, yeah, like Headhunter's kind of, I mean, has Headhunter really been like a huge problem in the past? I mean, it's kind of always been like it's always been really powerful, no doubt about that. Like, it's certainly awesome, but like at the same time, I don't think it's been so ridiculous that it needed attention like it did in Legion. You're shaking your head over there. You
being
little debatable, you know.
To be fair, like timeless conflict as content is something that's fundamentally quite different to a lot of content we've seen before, because you know, if two people have a Hydra map and they both put it in the map device with the same investment and RNG is favorable, they're both going to get the same amount out of that Hydra map investment. It's just one will do it faster.
Well,
it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why we know the changes made to it now. So yeah, I think that I think that I guess that map kind of highlighted the true difference between power levels and PoE to a somewhat larger degree than most content does. So, you know, I guess we addressed this particular case by addressing the content rather than by addressing head. But, you know, yeah, I mean, yeah, it was particularly egregious there, totally. But we don't think it's going to be a problem necessarily going forward as such.
It comes up from time to time. It does not, I believe this was mentioned as, it does not, well, we haven't designed Blight differently because Headhunter is.
Right.
There may be something we have to handle at the end, but we're not designing a league with thinking exactly, but what about Headhunter? It generally, if you worried about every single little finicky thing when you're designing a league like that, you would get trapped often.
Right.
Like, for example, animate weapon.
From the exact opposite direction, yes.
Yes, on the opposite direction.
One thing I was very surprised by when it was first made, and it's a really good item and I love it, is Solstice Vigil, but it's the fact that you have the like Headhunter plus self-temp chains plus Solstice Vigil. Like, how do you feel about that side of Headhunter or that self-buffing stuff?
I personally am not a huge fan of it, but I also understand that a lot of what PoE is combining all these mechanics to really benefit and utilize from something, and whether or not that's healthy or unhealthy. I mean, the interaction of mechanics, cool. It's a positive. It's cool that someone's thought of this. It's cool that people have done it, and of course, then a lot of people start doing it. Do we want to take that away? Maybe the solution to Headhunter, if we deem it necessary, is the self-temp chains or is the solstice vigil. I don't know. I don't have anything conclusive.
I don't think we're hurt. Honestly. Like I don't think we're particularly.
I agree.
Yeah. So
I
like
agree.
yeah. But no, that the interaction between them is awesome. Like it's cool.
Okay. Maybe not from a GGG point of view, but just from your guys' like individual viewpoints. Would you rather see more items of like Headhunter power level, so it becomes less special in that sense, or would you rather the game moved away from that? Just purely personal, not GGG. You know.
I mean, it's pretty hard to define that, I guess, because like, okay, like, is there really functionally any difference between nerfing the top items and like having item be as powerful as it? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you can raise people up to one level, or you can lower something down. Like, it doesn't really, it's more perception really at that point than anything else. Like,
Well, it's more to do with like having more like chase items, because I definitely encounter this thing with my streams sometimes where you have the guy who like their goal is to get that one item, they get it, and they're like, well, I've completed the game now. What do I do?
Right. I think Chris certainly is keen to have more chase items, but it's actually sort of hard to do. I think you probably got more ideas about this.
I like there to be more chase items. I would like them to be more accidental, and which Headhunter was. No one designed when we did Headhunter back in Nemesis. I mean, I don't even think it was worth very much for the majority of Nemesis. I don't think anyone was like, this is going to be the most powerful. I want more chase. I kind of want them to be. I like it when they're organically accidental. Like, I think it's quite interesting. Do I want to make them with the intent of making them that? No. I think that, and also whether or not, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, am I happy with, again, personally, with the fact that that's making characters the size of your screen and attacking at unreal rates and moving at extreme rates and etc. No, I'm not happy with it, even from just a visual standpoint, and it kind of portrays I wouldn't say it's actually a negative perspective on the game, but it is for outsiders.
It's a bit weird.
It's a bit, yeah. It's like, wait, is this? So you search up a video and it's like, oh, is this what PoE is? It's a character that's taller than the height of your screen. That kind of. That part personally, again, I'm not a huge fan of. From the power point of view, it's hard to say. It's hard to say. Like, was I happy with it in Domain of Timeless Conflict? No. Was I happy with it in Legion in general? Not really, but I didn't think it was too problematic. I don't know. Do we want more 100? Well, we're going back here. Do we want more items plus? I wouldn't mind it, but I'm not going to go and try and make one and be like, this is going to be a 100 exalted item. I'd rather not try and do that. I think that will result in some disasters.
I mean, speaking of organic growth of like powerful chase items in the game, I think that the direction that I was about to say the last few handful of leagues, but going a little while back now, all the way to Delve, the direction the game's been taking in favor of like really specialized rare tools for your build that can have an absurd amount of power if you spend an absurd amount of wealth chasing them. I like that a lot better than something like Headhunter personally. I find it a lot more interesting to go for the absolutely correct Elder Touched helmet that has the right Delve mod that you have the right enchant on and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I think I also am a fan of that also.
Yeah, so, I agree.
Yeah, that's good.
Why not change the size thing with Headhunter?
Because it's once again down to like, you know, if the monster has plus size, then it should work on the player, and that's just one of those. Also, it's another one of those things where it's like, you know, yeah, it should work because that's how, you know, if it's got the massive mod, then it should apply to the player. You know,
but that's not fun.
But I mean,
caps aren't fun.
I know.
No, I'm talking
but,
to Tarke. I'm agreeing with you here.
Mm.
I'm talking to Tarke. The first time I used a headhunter and stole an Ellie Reflect aura, I was giddy. It was wonderful. I
Well,
shouted,
you can
"I'm the
still-
Ellie
no, but, like,
Reflect now!"
Okay,
and
what I'm
charged
saying
into
though,
them.
like, I'm sure
just
someone
visually seeing the thing and taking the thing is really cool.
I'm sure someone would be upset when their boot no longer fills the entire screen. But if their character filled up like 80% of the screen, they'd still be like, my character's pretty big, this is pretty cool. You know what I mean?
there's a thing. I don't know if I should be. No, well,
Yeah,
okay,
go
right.
on.
Like there's a thing. There's a thing where it's like people are there are certain people who are kind of like no fun allowed kind of people, right? Like they exist on our team as well sometimes, where they'll just like they'd rather there were limits on everything. There was like, you couldn't have things scaling. You can't have a certain number of projectiles where there's a maximum. There's a certain number of corpses and all these sorts of things like limits. There's lots of people like to impose limits. And I would say that it is our company culture in general to not have limits if we can get away with it. And it's only at the point where something's actually really not working fundamentally where we actually introduce those kinds of limits. So yeah, we prefer to avoid them. And it isn't really breaking anything to have like the massive mod be able to stack a bunch and your character to be huge. I mean, it's not like it's happening every day to everyone, right? Like, it's just a kind of a bit of an out. And so for that reason, it's kind of is fine. And that's kind of the reason why. And yeah, as I said, we just try to avoid those kinds of limits where possible.
Yeah, like removing the cooldown on Desecrate.
Yeah, sure.
And making it an instant cast. Yeah.
I'm pretty happy there, so it's really Octavian, Raiz, or if you guys have anything you want to ask or address that you think we've missed, just kind of go for it.
No, I'm
good.
hyped as hell for Blight League now.
Great, excellent.
Well, in that case, I'd like to thank you both for coming on and look forward to talking to you again. And I'm really looking forward to playing with Mamba Strike in 3.8.
Yeah. Right.
Great skill.
Yeah.
Alright.
Sure.
Well, I'll let you guys jump off then, and I'll try and
Very
make
good.
this a less cringe ending than last time, Jonathan.
Yep, absolutely. Very good. Right. Thank you very much. Well,
No, guys.
see you later, and we're off.
That was good. I didn't tell them to leave. That was an improvement. That was an improvement to the last dev episode where I told them to leave now.
You did try, yeah.
Yeah. I think that went well.
Tarke, did you see? I put it in the Discord. Somebody
I did
made
see.
a
I'm gonna bring that up for the stream since it's kind of good.
Hang on, I gotta get credit. It was sent to me by Fragman Dan.
Mhm.
Got to make sure the right guy is getting.